So what are you looking at when you're in your mid 20s? Well, I have to build my career so I have any hope of paying off this debt, which means I don't have time for like getting married and having kids and then to think about taking time away from your career to have children. Well, you're not going to be keeping up with your wages. You're not going to be considered relevant or up to date in whatever field you're working in. So a lot of women just don't ever get there. They're told that to be a good, smart girl and to be successful, these are the steps you have to do. And you'd better have a career and your own money first. That's like a prerequisite to having children. The last chapter of the book is basically, let's take a look at this last 100 years of feminism since it became the dominant thing, and let's assess what we've gotten out of it and where things stand. All women think that they're going to have the high paying office job with the corner window office, and they're going to be flying off to Paris or New York to have power lunches where they're going to close the deal and make all this money. They think they're going to have this exciting career. And she got super angry and kind of like yelled at me and was like, because, and she's talking about her new husband, who I don't want to say his name, but she was like, because I tell him what we're eating for dinner. I tell him what we're spending the money on. He doesn't have his political opinions. I tell him what his political opinions are and who we're voting for.
Today, I'm actually so excited. I have a special guest, Rachel Wilson. She wrote the book Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. This is her book right here. I started reading it, and she's red pilling me even further about feminism. Like, I started reading it and it's talking about how it came from like cult worship or something. Yeah. And I was like, what? So I'm really excited to dive into these topics. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Everybody kept telling me, oh, you and Pearl have to get together. You guys would be great. So I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And just before we start, tell the people, where can they follow you, find your book?
Yeah, you can find my book on Amazon. You can follow me on Twitter. It's Rach, the number 4, patriarchy. Yes, I want to restore patriarchy and kind of rehabilitate the term because it has such a negative connotation that I don't think it deserves. So on Twitter, at Rach4patriarchy. I also have a Substack where I put a lot of my writing. If you are a reader, that's rwilson.substack.com. Okay. And I have a YouTube channel, a little baby brand new YouTube channel. It's just Rachel Wilson.
I would love to get you on the show with some of these girls I talk to. Let me tell you, she's a superhero too. You have 5 kids?
Yes.
5. That's beautiful. I grew up, I have 9 siblings, but it's kind of a weird story. I grew up with 6. So in the house I had 6. And I will say 5 is like the perfect number because it's big and everyone fits in the car barely.
Yeah.
But it's not too crazy. 6, you start having to like, I don't know, get the travel
bus.
Yeah, you had to switch to a bus. That's what happened. We had to go from the minivan to the bus.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to tell you what I know about feminism.
Okay.
And I want you to red pill me even further. Okay, this is what I want. So from what I understand, feminism, did it start with women getting the right to vote? Or was it before that?
It was before that. So in the book, I take 3 chapters to kind of explain the ancient origins of the ideas, philosophies, and the like religious underpinnings of feminist ideology. And then I kind of start with like the French Revolution. The revolutionary period is really when it started to kick off. Most people do think that feminism was like either during the 1920s with suffrage or in the 60s with the sexual revolution, but it goes back quite a lot further than that, actually. So I do take some time in the book to explain where it came from and how it got going prior to the 1920s.
Okay, so when did it start? 1800, 1850? Like
I'd say like late 1700s is when you could really call it a political movement.
Really? It was that early?
Yep.
Okay, and you said it started...
Mary Wollstonecraft was probably the first like popular feminist, and she was hanging out with American and French revolutionaries in like the 1760s, 1770s.
60s. Okay, so what did she do?
So she was somebody who kind of forced her way. She kind of pushed her way into intellectual male circles because she was having some affairs with a lot of the prominent revolutionary writers of the time, like Thomas Paine and some of the French revolutionaries. And she she wrote like the first tract, or like a political tract, about what she thought were like the natural rights of women. And this all came from the Enlightenment and this egalitarian idea of like equality, humanitarianism. And so one of the first things you would think of if you're coming from that kind of a worldview is like gender equality.
Mhm.
So this was a time where we were starting to see a shift towards more of a material and biological worldview, where some of these women started making the argument that, hey, just because I'm a woman doesn't necessarily mean that I can't do things men can do intellectually. And we should be, this is the birth of nation states and voting rights and things like that. So right off the gate, you had some women who wanted that, but they were definitely not popular with other women, and they weren't even popular with other men, except the other like really radical left-wing revolutionary types.
Okay, so they started by like infiltrating these male academic circles and talking about, so what did she say were the natural like rights of women?
It was pretty much the same stuff we're hearing now, where
Yeah.
it's like I should have a right to self-determination, I should be able to make my own money, I should be able to there was always an emphasis on sexual freedom and reproductive freedom even back then.
Really? In the
Yes,
17th? Wow.
yeah, and I think the reason is because Wollstonecraft, so she tried to have a three-way with a prominent writer of her time whose wife was not having it, and kind of got her booted out of proper English society for a while. And she had a child out of wedlock.
Mhm.
Um, she was doing things during that time that, although you might think, like when you would do your man on the street interviews where you're asking people their opinion, most people's idea of feminism is, okay, women have been oppressed through all of history. They weren't allowed to do anything, and they were beaten and raped legally, and life was just terrible for women, and they were chained to a stove and forced to give birth and cook meals, and that's all they could do. And, this very grim, horrific idea of what life was like for women until 100 years before now.
Mhm.
And really, that's not the case at all. And I take some time in the book also to outline that. Wollstonecraft herself was making a living writing, traveling, um, doing political protests, doing like, revolutionary activities. She was actually able to make herself a living. She had a child out of wedlock. Nobody threw her in jail. Nobody stoned her to death. She was doing a lot of things that you would probably think would, get her destroyed by the patriarchy, but she only got some mild pushback, really, socially. Women weren't very interested in, being political and participating in that part of life. They were pretty happy with where they were. And this is a common theme in these old feminist writings, that they are continually disappointed that most women don't seem interested in feminism. So they had to kind of find ways to mainstream it and make it more appealing. And so they would use a lot of the things they do now, like fashion and literature and propaganda primarily. So
Really? So you're telling me in the 1700s a girl was free to work and make a living, and there was no,
yeah,
common was it? Do you know?
it wasn't super common, but not because it wasn't allowed. It wasn't common because most women did at that time want to get married and have families and have security. And this is just prior to the Industrial Revolution really kicking off. So it wasn't super common, but certainly in the West, when we're going through the revolutionary period, there were a lot of women who participated in different, revolutionary activities, and they tended to not get their heads cut off as often as men, get thrown in prison as often as men. So I think they were also useful to the male left-wing revolutionaries because they could put a woman or two out there, and you're not going to get the same brutality. They might get slightly admonished or chastised socially, but they weren't going to get beheaded or thrown in prison as
Oh,
quickly as men. So I think it was kind of a sneaky way, like a male feminist trickery kind of way to
yeah.
get their political ideas to the forefront and not have to risk their own hides as much. So I think that was the other reason some of them thought, oh yeah, let's get some women in here doing some of this stuff, right?
And you mentioned too that it was tied into witchcraft.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
ancient religions, goddess, like what is that?
Yeah. So if you think about what feminism is, feminists love to say that feminism is about equality and opportunity and choice for women, but it's not. I think you have figured that out, and a lot of people are figuring that out, and it never was. It's always been you had Christianity, which is a patriarchal religion, and Christian society is patriarchal. Now, that doesn't mean abuse and oppression of women by men. Patriarchy means the men kind of run things, they're in charge of governance and things like that. And that women are provided for and protected by men. So in ancient times, goddess worship cults like people who followed Inanna or Ishtar, or people who were into black magic and witchcraft and glorified like female demons such as Lilith, or the Hindu goddess Kali, who strangely is on the cover of the very first feminist magazine in the United States. Ms. Magazine in the 70s chose the bloodthirsty male sacrificing goddess Kali to be on their cover, which is a super weird choice for a magazine in the 70s that you're selling to suburban women. But they chose her because she represents sexual freedom, vengeance against men. She wears a necklace of bloody men's severed heads and a belt around her waist of men's severed arms. And she actually had one of the most prolific death cults in all of history in India. It was called the Thuggies. That's where we actually get the English word thug from. And they were a cult that worshipped Kali, the goddess, and they would sacrifice men. They couldn't sacrifice women because she'd get really mad if you did that. So they would kidnap men and sacrifice them to her. And they're in the Guinness Book of Records for being the most prolific death cult of all time. They went on for hundreds of years doing this and were responsible for millions of male sacrifices. And that's who they put on the cover of the first women's feminist magazine in the 70s, which was also started with CIA money. So you had the CIA pushing this stuff in the 70s as well.
Okay, I have so many questions. So,
I know it's a lot.
Was this in the 1700s too? Like there was this back then? Like, so were the women like the Mary Wollstonecraft, was she part of that? Did she do witchcraft? And
she was more of like the new brand of atheists that they had after the Enlightenment, where there was a lot of pushback against traditional Christianity, a lot of pushback against the church. The revolutionary period was kind of, I mean, what the name implies. We're going to revolt against the entire order of things. You know, revolt against monarchy, revolt against the nuclear family, against patriarchy, against the established order that had been, you know, the status quo in Europe for centuries at that point. So most of the more modern feminists, you will see some who are atheists, but you will see a lot. In fact, suffragettes, by and large, were spiritualists. Many of them were fortune tellers, tarot card readers. They were spirit mediums. And this was, being a spirit medium was a really popular thing in the 1800s. And most of the female speakers who pushed suffrage claimed to be spirit mediums. And part of that was because they could get away with saying things that they might not have been able to get away with saying otherwise. If you say you're possessed by the ghost of someone and it's them talking, not you, you can kind of get away with saying some things that maybe you couldn't if you were trying to say them as yourself. So that would be one reason. But yeah, there's always been this tie to witchcraft and goddess worship because that is the kind of the polar opposite religiously and philosophically of Christianity or even Islam, where you have this idea that women and women's sexual power should be the dominant force of society. It should be the ruling force of society. And it was never really about equality. It was about subjugation of men. If you look at goddesses like the Hindu goddess Kali, she's always pictured standing with her foot on the chest of her male cohort Shiva. And so it's always like this idea that the goddesses are the ones dominating the male gods and that using their sexual power to manipulate.
And you sort of see that today. Like, okay, I don't know if you've noticed that, you probably have, you're red pill. So I was like, she's based. So okay, when I watch movies and I'll see like the women dominating the men, like in all the companies and stuff, and they just like walk around like girl boss. I'm like, I don't see these women in real life. They're not real.
No, they're not.
But it's
I
kind of the same thing where they're dominating all, like they're dominating their relationships, they're dominating at work. And so it's kind of the same like pattern, I guess. But
yes.
my question is with Kali, like, so this was a real tribe or something in India
Yes. Yeah,
where
they're
they
still
were,
around now.
they're still around?
Yeah, it's part of the Hindu religion. Kali is part of the of Hindu religion, but the cult specifically got wiped out by the British when they colonized India. They were like, okay, enough of this, because they would kidnap a lot of the like British soldiers and things like that and sacrifice them. So they finally, it was the British that came and wiped out the death cult. But goddess worship is still around and it's very popular. In fact, I believe Wicca is now the fastest growing religion in the UK.
Wicca?
Yes, Gerald Gardner, who started Wicca, he was from England. So it's very popular there. A lot of the things that we hear about witch trials have been very whitewashed because liberal Hollywood is always very sympathetic to, witches and, witch persecution. And it's not that there weren't some people who were wrongly accused of witchcraft or wrongly executed because of it. Of course, that's true to an extent, but there's a reason a lot of people don't know why witches were burned at the stake or otherwise punished. And that's because a lot of times they also worked as midwives and they were the ones that performed abortion was only medicalized in the 1950s. So prior to that, almost all abortions through history have been performed by midwives. And many of the midwives would be practicing witches or into witchcraft or other types of like mystic magical
Wow.
practices. So that's one of the reasons that they were targeted, not just because the evil Christians just were superstitious and thought witches were cursing them. There was part of that, but a lot of it was these were the people who were performing the abortions and they wanted to eliminate that.
Wait, so how early were like how long was been around? I don't actually even know.
Forever, since ancient times, we have like a lot of ancient evidence of abortion happening. And again, it was usually in like it was more prolific in goddess worship cults or like ancient Rome, if you had polytheist religions, things like that, where you had goddesses, um, liberation and temple and things like that went along with those religions. So sometimes a would be an actual religious sacrament if it was like maybe a cult or a goddess worship cult. You would have temple and you would have a as a result of that. So that's one of the main reasons for this persecution is like a lot of times they were going after the providers.
Okay, what I don't understand, Kali, they're
Yeah.
killing these men. How could they kill the men? Because women are weaker than men. So I'm
So
like,
these were men. The cult was made of men. They would worship women and they would worship the goddess Kali, but these were men
oh,
who would actually sacrifice other men to her because they thought that Kali was the life giver. She was like the dark mother that gave life to the world, but she's also a vengeful spirit that can destroy the entire world. She's like one of the most powerful gods in the Hindu religion. So they always thought that if they were going into battle or going to war, or if just generally if things weren't good, that Kali must be pissed off. So we have to round up a bunch of young men and sacrifice them to her to satiate her bloodlust because she hates men.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the all right, so in the 17th, so basically the roots of feminism, there's a lot of parallels to some of these like goddess work, like these cult
Yes.
goddess worshiping religions. So one of them's Kali, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them and that was the thuggies where they would literally take men and give them to the goddess, the female goddess. And it was the idea that sexual, like we should basically bend to women's like sexual powers. Is that it? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so, but in the 1700s, it wasn't necessarily that they're a part of that religion,
Right.
but there was more of like the modern atheist. But a lot of atheists now still have remnants of the goddess stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Because like I'm just thinking like horoscopes, I think is
Yes.
part of that.
Oh
The
yeah.
what do they say? The crystals. Someone
Yes.
brought a crystal on one of our dating shows. I was like, I keep that away. I don't need.
Yeah, all of that stuff is it all comes from ancient goddess worship and witchcraft. And in the book, I explain why, like what like you're kind of sitting there trying to piece it together, like, but why would modern feminists be into this? It seems like superstitious and old fashioned. It's because if you're raised in America or the UK, where you probably have a Protestant or a Catholic upbringing, even if your parents don't go to church, it's kind of a culturally Christian area. You grow up as a young woman, you're watching all the propaganda, you're seeing the kick-ass chicks in the movies, you're seeing Cardi B and Megan the Stallion, you know, talking about using their sexuality to get power and fame and money. And you get to college and you're even further, you know, indoctrinated into feminism by your professors and gender studies and all these things. You start to see Christianity and even like cultural Christianity as oppressive to women, as, you know, inherently holding women back. You start to resent that. And but people are still spiritual. Women especially are still spiritual and they're intuitive, and so they need something. And so when they are introduced to something like Wicca or all the different forms of nice witchcraft that we have now, like you'll see people say, oh, I'm a green witch, which means I just worship nature and I love plants and crystals and animals and things like that. They're very like Mother Earth worship, which is also an ancient religious idea. um, it's very appealing. It's very appealing if you've been brainwashed and propagandized with feminist messaging, because it tells you that you're powerful, that you should use your sexuality to control and manipulate men. You should leverage your sexuality to try to get money for yourself and status for yourself. And it pits you against the enemy, which is men, and it makes you feel like you're the powerful one. You know, like goddess worship is extremely. You see it all the time on social media where they'll be like, "Yes, queen, you're such a goddess." You know, like this language that
Right. Yeah.
this language is very indicative of these really ancient ideas of goddess worship and witchcraft, where women are using their sexuality to control and manipulate reality and dominate men.
So all right, in the so how did these ideas come from like India to the US?
Well, a few different ways. You had colonization. So, like the British colonized India, that's one major way. A lot of people would go there and live with, you know, people in Hindu cultures or even Buddhist cultures and bring back a lot of those ideas to the West and write about them. You would have the like during the Islamic invasions of Europe, they brought some ideas that were Eastern. And then something I write a lot about in the book is theosophy. Theosophy was a religious movement from like the mid to late 1800s onward. It's now kind of morphed into New Age mysticism. That's kind of where the New Age comes from, is out of theosophy. And that was an attempt to blend Eastern mystic religion with like Western ideas like Rosicrucianism. So it's just basically an occult religion. And Aleister Crowley came out of theosophy. Helena Blavatsky came out of there. And a lot of these people had intelligence connections. So we're talking around the Victorian era. A lot of these people worked for British intelligence, or maybe British and Russian intelligence or things like that. And they were traveling and speaking and setting up worship centers and trying to get new members. And they were actively trying to grow theosophy into a religion. And the elites loved it because it's very New World Order, ecumenical. It lends itself to having like a one world government. So there were a lot of elites pushing theosophy and occult ideas around this time too. And
And
it was very useful for getting people whipped up into a revolutionary panic as well.
so what do you mean elites? Like who?
Yeah, who,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It would be powerful bloodline families that have been around for centuries, the banking elite, you know, some of these banking families that have been around a long time. I know we're on YouTube, so I'll be kind of careful what I say, but it would be basically the people who control the institutions. So if you look at some of the biggest, most powerful universities, media companies, banking, and these are people from all different ethnic backgrounds. It's not, a lot of people think it's one group. It's not. There were British elite. There's elite in every nation. So it's whoever are the most rich, powerful, wealthy people that control the institutions.
So why would they want a revolution? Like why would they want people in an uproar?
Yeah, there's a permanent state of revolution and rebellion is really useful to these people because it basically, and this is definitely what happened with feminism. People think these are like grassroots movements for human rights and things like that, and they almost never are. I've done some really, really extensive research on this. And the reason they love to keep people in a perpetual state of revolution is because then if you want to change things, if you want to restructure society, you can co-opt these movements and steer them the direction that you want to go. So in the book, I explain how it's not a coincidence that the same people who funded the suffrage movement are the same people who instituted central banking, the Federal Reserve Act, the income tax system, even the system that produced tax withholdings. Those people were all like really, really active and
Because
popular in
because
suffrage.
then they can sell them the solution.
Yes, yes. So
This
what?
is the problem here. Like, let me sell you. This is the policy we're trying to pass. So it helps them control people because you say we're fighting against this problem, even though
Right.
they know it's not a real problem because women
Exactly.
are happy at home. But they're like, if we can disrupt it, convince them they have a horrible life or whatever, then we can sell them this solution.
Yes, exactly. And so, what did the elites get out of feminism? They got double the tax base, right? Because now you could only tax men before. If you were going to institute an income tax, like they did around the turn of the century, right before suffrage, you're only taxing maybe 30% of the population, right? If you can get women out of the home and into factories, you can tax their income as well. It doubled the labor market. So remember, this is right after the first industrial revolution when everything has become mechanized and these big golden age wealthy people have railroads they're trying to build, they have factories they're building all over the world. And if you wanted a huge pool of cheap labor, get the women into the workforce because at that time they're unskilled, you're convincing them that they must have their own money, that they're being oppressed by having to stay home and raise kids and obey men. So it's better for you, even if you have to go slave for 12 hours a day in a factory for a really low wage, it's going to give you this independence, and they're kind of dangling this carrot. So it gave them a huge new pool of cheap labor. It gave them a whole new tax base. And it also gave them a new political voting bloc to manipulate. And women are very easily propagandized.
Mhm.
So if you are a politician and this is around the time that Edward Bernays and marketing and propaganda was just being developed alongside the field of psychology. And they learned that women are much more malleable, much easier to propagandize than men. So that's another reason why it's great to have women voting, because you put out a sad story, you show some kind of abuses or something bad that's happening, you get women really emotionally worked up and they're all going to vote for whatever is going to fix that. They're going to vote for security, they're going to vote for safety. So the people who were powerful at the time had a lot of different motivations to drag women out of the home, put them in factories and put them in politics and use them kind of for their propaganda purposes.
Okay, so 1800s, 1700s, it's Mary Wollstonecraft.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the writer, but it's
Yeah.
like a fringe movement. It doesn't sound like it was that popular.
It wasn't mainstream yet at all. She kind of kicked it off in the West a little bit. And then we see like the 1840s was a time where there's all these uh, experiments going on with socialism, which was kind of new at this time. A lot of socialist, communist communes start popping up in the United States and in the West, even in England, quite a few of them. And a lot of those early, like communist utopian cults, they practiced a lot of feminist stuff. Like they would try gender swapping. And I talk about this in the book, some historical examples of these cults getting together and having very bizarre ideas about like uh, polyamorous marriage, but having the women be in charge and having the men take care of children, and some really bizarre things that they tried, because communism, again, is another thing that wants this equality. Everybody's the same and everybody's equal and we're all labor units, like these kind of ideas go right along with feminism. So you'll see feminism always wrapped up with communist socialist ideology, goddess worship and witchcraft, and then also veganism and vegetarianism.
Okay.
And that also comes out of all these religious and philosophical ideas. So basically you just had these intellectual circles in the mid 1800s, and they start to get more and more liberal with pushing women to the front and having them be speakers and having them be writers. In the United States, we had Margaret Fuller, who was probably the first person writing that was popular who talked about gender abolition. So she was part of the Transcendental Club and felt like communism and humanity moving to into the new age, we need equality, we need to get rid of gender ideas, we need to stop limiting humanity with gender roles. So these ideas are pretty old. This idea of gender abolition, which sounds really new to most of us, like, oh, it only kind of popped up in the last 10 years. That actually comes out of the 1840s. There were already people
Really?
saying this. Yeah.
Wow. So when women it got the right to vote, was it the late 1800s or early 1900s?
1920-ish is
Okay.
right. In the United States, it was 1920. In England, they kind of phased it in, but right around the same time. So I'd say right around 1920.
So I heard that in the 1800s, like they were like the women's movement was planning an assassinations and that they were
Yes.
actually like no, like they weren't known as a peaceful movement at all. Like, could you tell me more about that?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of women who were in the suffrage movement were basically terrorists. So they would do bombings, poisonings, assassinations. They would, burn down buildings, put rocks through storefronts, and they would get arrested quite often and put in prison, and then they would go on hunger strikes. Now, this is something that I hear all the time because feminists who really hate me will say, you wouldn't even be allowed to be on the internet talking right now if it weren't for the brave women who came before you and made
I
it
did that
possible.
too.
Yes.
But I
Well,
but the first female, it doesn't make sense because the first female millionaire was like she was in the early 1900s or late 1800s. You know what I'm
late
talking about?
1800s. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it was that lady they made the movie about. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there were actually a handful of them. And one of the wealthiest women who funded suffrage, she's in the book. Her name was Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. So she married into the Vanderbilt family and got one of the first ever divorces that wealthy people had in the United States. She got a ton of money out of that divorce settlement. And she alleged that her spouse was cheating, got a divorce, got a huge divorce settlement, inherited a bunch of properties from this man's family, from a Vanderbilt. Then she married his best friend, typical feminist kind of move, right? Marry the best friend who's also wealthy. He was from the Belmont family, and they were like bankers and financial advisors to the
Did
Rothschilds.
she do it again? Did she do it again?
He did, well, he died.
Oh,
So
okay.
he drank himself to death and died. So she got yet another inheritance and became, I think she was at the time the world's wealthiest woman. And
Okay.
so she said after that she was done with men and she was going to dedicate the rest of her life to feminism and the suffrage movement, and she funded most of it. So when these women would get put in prison for doing terrorist activities, she would bail them out. She would put up their bail money and get them out of jail and help them reorganize, get back out there and continue doing this stuff. And again, this is even at this time, we're talking turn of the century, right around 1900, 1910s. Suffrage was still deeply unpopular with women. Only about 4% of women in all of the like straw polls that they would do at the time, or where they're doing like a survey to ask women if they even want suffrage on the ballot. At that time, from all the data I could find, it was about 4% of women who were interested. They had much bigger membership in anti-suffrage groups, way more women members than they had in pro-suffrage groups. And I'm working on another book right now about what the anti-suffrage women said, because they put out a lot of writings and pamphlets and political tracts as well. And they had really great, solid reasoning for not wanting the vote.
That was what switched my opinion on voting, because I always thought there was like three waves of that's always what you hear, right?
Yeah.
There's three waves of feminism, and like the second and third were bad, but the first was good. Until I heard on like a Crowder episode that like women didn't want the right to vote. So I was like, well, why wouldn't they want that? Like, it's not like I'm like like they had to have had a reason, right?
Right.
So then I started looking at like I started looking up some anti-suffragette like writings, and this
Yeah.
woman was writing how it was like the breakdown of the family and how you're supposed to like two are supposed to be one flesh. And I was like, dang, that's kind of what happened.
It is what
She
happened.
was saying this is going to be the breakdown of the family. This can't happen. I'm like, well, dad, like the based woman, like she was
Yeah.
right. And so
Yeah,
that's when I realized it wasn't like what I thought.
No, it's definitely not what anyone thinks. We've all been sold like a certain packaged version of feminism. And the reason for that, because you might be asking yourself, okay, there's the mainline history of all this stuff that everyone's kind of heard. What makes me think that Rachel has just like found all this stuff that nobody else knows? Well, the reason is because in the late 60s, when the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation literally created women's studies, that was not a field of study until like 1970. They created it for the purposes of continuing this social engineering that they were already working on. And once that happened, and they gave tons of funding to major universities to create women's studies departments, they basically became the gatekeepers of all the history. So the Margaret Sanger papers, any of the historical collections that we have that would tell you all of this information, it is in the libraries of the gender studies departments at these huge universities, and the professors there kind of get to gatekeep the information, translate it and package it, and then give it to students, write books, do things like so. They kind of disseminate the information, and they literally come right out and say that they do that from a feminist standpoint. Because, and here's their reasoning. They said, well, the real history, like the unbiased, not that there's ever truly unbiased history, but the historical narrative that existed before 1970, well, that was written by men. So they're going to put a patriarchal spin on it. And we don't like that. So we're going to rewrite it. We're going to literally rewrite women's history from the standpoint of the oppressed woman. And it's called standpoint feminism. And they're very upfront about it. They don't even deny doing that. They say, yeah, of course, we took the history and we rewrote it from the perspective of the oppressed woman. So from their perspective. So the story that everyone has gotten is not anything close to what really happened. It's their version. It's through a feminist lens what they think happened.
Okay, because that's what I realized too. Because they're all giving me flack because I was on a stream once and I said, all these studies that come out, I don't need a study to tell me anything. What I mean is like, I'll see studies that say the sky isn't blue.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look up, it'll say it's pink. And I'm like, well, I'm looking at it now. It's blue. And what I realized is I think there's a lot of studies like pushed out by like feminism where like it's like made in these universities and it's like with their idea. Like there's something with the level of studies where like the quality has gone down. And I don't know how or why. I'm not a big, academic but I'm just like as an outsider looking in, it's like something's off. You could just like feel it. Like you could just, I don't know.
Yeah, if you have just like a little bit of if you're somebody like you who's like, well, but I want to know what's really going on here because what you're telling me doesn't match up with like the problems I'm seeing going on in my culture right now. Like you're a young woman who's trying to figure out dating, relationships, marriage. Why is marriage such a crumbling institution? Why are all the children being raised by single mom? Like what's at the bottom of this? What's going on here? And when you try to actually dig into the history, it's very difficult because they gatekeep the history. They kind of co-opted it and turned it into what they want it to be for propaganda purposes so that they can steer the social movements, right? They do this. It's kind of like the Black Lives Matter, where they'll rewrite the history there as well. What's that called? Like the 1815 project or something like that. I can never remember the year, but it's basically where they'll kind of rewrite history from the perspective of the oppressed, black slave. It's very similar to that. They just do it with women instead.
What are they? I don't know anything about the 1815 project. What's that?
I think that's the wrong year, but it's basically a Marxist initiative to rewrite American history. Because of course they claim it's whitewashed, it's written by the oppressor, it's written by white men, so it's not the right history. We have to rewrite it from the perspective of the oppressed, African slave, and that's the real history. So they're basically accusing mainline history of writing everything to bias white men. So they're like, well, we can play that game too, and we're going to write the history from the perspective of the oppressed black man. Or in the case of feminists, we're going to rewrite history from the perspective of an oppressed liberal feminist.
No, I got into so much trouble recently because I was talking about, I read, because this was another thing where I read the writings of the people at the time and it was really interesting. So I used to run, I used to be a big runner, right? I ran a marathon.
Yeah.
Horrible. Don't ever do it. That's the worst decision in my life. I did not. Some people finish and they just feel so good. I didn't. I felt horrible. I was like, what was I doing this for? Now, okay, when I was running, I would listen to audiobooks and I listened to this book of a former slave and a guy who literally like he was born a slave, right? And it was so interesting because he liked his owner.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Did he just say he loved and so then I read this other project which was like 2,000 like video accounts and some were horrible but some weren't and I was just like but it's like you can't say those facts without people like freaking out.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So the reason I felt like I need to do a book is because everything I'm saying goes counter to the mainstream narrative and what people believe about what they think's true about feminism. This idea that women were just super oppressed and one day they had enough and they started marching and they demanded the right to vote. And then they got the right to vote. And then they said, we are not going to stay in abusive marriages and we want no fault divorce. And, this is what people think happened, that women were just on this quest for justice and equality. And they were just fighting the oppression that they'd lived under for so long because they just couldn't take it anymore. And that's not at all what we find if we go back and read what women at the time were writing about. In fact, to go back to this idea of feminism being born from the occult, a lot of people don't know that a lot of the prominent suffragettes from the late 1800s rewrote the first 5 books of the Bible with a feminist spin. And it's called it's called the Women's Bible, and you can still buy it right now on Amazon. It's by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was best friends with Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's probably one of, she's maybe the number 2 most popular suffragist of all time. And she wrote this with 39 other feminists. And they said, right in the foreword, right in the beginning of the book, the introduction, Elizabeth Cady Stanton writes that women will never have true liberation until we get rid of Christianity. And Christianity is patriarchal, the men are in charge. It always, has this worldview of women being mothers and being, like Mary was a pure virgin, right? And it's always the men who are the ministers and the clergy and the kings and things like this. And so we have to, she said, it'd be great if we could just get rid of the Bible. If we could just get rid of it, that'd be my first preference, but it's too popular. It's the most popular book in print, millions of copies all over the world. It's been popular for 1,000 years. So we can't get rid of it. So what we have to do then is change it to the point that it's unrecognizable. And she says that right in there, the quotes in my book as well. So from their perspective, we have to do away with and destroy Christianity. We have to destroy the family because women can't be truly liberated until we do those 2 things. So they rewrote the Bible, took all the patriarchal stuff out they didn't like. For instance, they did not make any reference to Eve being the one to eat from the tree of knowledge. They made it to where it was both Adam and Eve or something like that. Like they took out anything they felt was patriarchal.
Yeah, and I felt like that. That Bible tale. I was like, it really shows what happens when you listen to women. Like we should not.
Well, and part of the moral of that story is that Adam was nowhere around. The reason the serpent went for Eve was because Adam was not like keeping her under his watch and protection. Somehow, momentarily, she was on her own, and he knew that the way to get to the man was through the woman. And that is still very true to this day. And especially in politics, the way they get to the men is through the women. And in marketing, the way they get to men is through women. So,
Oh my gosh, that's the most red pill thing I've ever heard.
yeah,
That's so true. Even like in war stories, like the way they get to like a powerful ruler is through the girl he's sleeping with.
exactly. Yep.
Oh my God. Okay, so 19. All right, you said this. What is the science table?
Yes. So that chapter is about how all of these suffragettes who are out marching and terrorizing and trying to get the vote for women were also having seances and pretending to be spirit mediums. Some of them really believed it. Some of them were total scam artists. Like I talk about Victoria Woodhull in the book. And she was a spirit medium who was also a complete shyster, literal snake oil salesman. And she would pretend to be a spirit medium and then give people phony cancer cures. She would give them stock market information. And this is a really interesting story. So somehow Victoria Woodhull meets Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the big, mega rich Gilded Age millionaires, one of the biggest guys on Wall Street at the time. And she was an advocate of free love and she wanted to make sex outside of marriage mainstream and acceptable and normal. She had a ring of prostitutes who were kind of like spies for her. So what she did by hooking up with Cornelius Vanderbilt, she would have all of her sleep with a lot of the Wall Street bankers who were in those circles and get information. Tale as old as time. They say prostitution is the world's oldest profession, but actually espionage probably goes right along with prostitution. Very often you will have escorts and prostitutes be informants or intelligence agents. So that's what she did. She got a bunch of insider trading info through her prostitution ring, gave it to Cornelius Vanderbilt, and they took the stock market for a ginormous amount of money. I don't even remember, millions of dollars in today's money, hundreds of millions maybe. In the first stock market crash, they basically engineered the first stock market crash and profited off of it through the intelligence gathering she did through her prostitution ring.
I don't even know.
Um,
Like, okay. That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. But I'm a little impressed. That's like kind of
yeah, she was
smart.
crafty. She
I'm
was
like,
impressive.
I would not have thought it. Like, go get inside information. That's a smart plan. Okay. So what is that what the science table was?
Yeah, it was this phenomenon through the late 1800s when spiritualism was very popular. Spiritualism was like this religious movement of talking to the dead, contacting ghosts and spirits, house hauntings, things like that. That's when that stuff became really popular. And so a lot of the suffragettes would pretend to be spirit mediums or tarot card readers or fortune tellers in order to do public speaking, or like what Victoria Woodhull was doing. It was kind of a grifty way to make money. It was a way, if you were kind of say that you had gotten kind of kicked out of the good graces of society for being a loose woman, you could still make a living as like a spirit medium or a tarot card reader or fortune teller. So there's an old saying that goes, there's hardly a suffragette who did not sit around the seance table, because it was so, these are the women who pushed suffrage, was these women, and
It's
they're
like
the ones who rewrote
leftover.
the Bible. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
in fact, one of the other really popular suffragettes who helped rewrite the Bible, her name was Matilda Joslyn Gage, and she was the inspiration for the witches in the Wizard of Oz, because she was the mother-in-law of Frank L. Baum, who wrote the Wizard of Oz. And they were very close, and she inspired him. And so Glenda the Good Witch came from Matilda Joslyn Gage, because she would teach Frank L. Baum that witchcraft really isn't that bad. It's just women fighting for power, and it's just women fighting oppression. Witchcraft is actually just like based women fighting the patriarchy, right? So that's actually where the idea of the Good Witch and the Wizard of Oz came from too. So she was into witchcraft. Many of them were theosophists, occultists. Some of them were in the Golden Dawn, like Aleister Crowley circles. So yeah, there was a lot of occult practice going on in suffrage circles.
And then that led to the suffrage march.
Yeah. Yep. So
Okay.
that's when they all decided to take to the streets and start terrorizing and protesting, knowing that they had these wealthy backers who would bail them out of jail if they got arrested.
Oh. Oh, and so that's when like that's why they were seen as a terrorist group because they had the divorced lady for Victoria something, right?
Victoria Woodhull, yes.
Yeah, who was
Oh,
banned.
and Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, yes. She,
Oh, Vanderbilt, like the Serena Vanderbilt, the Gossip Girl. Anyone?
yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
the Vanderbilt family is this like ultra wealthy family. Like Anderson Cooper is from the Vanderbilt family. Gloria Vanderbilt, the designer. So they were like a really wealthy family of the time, and yeah, that's why they were able to go out and do terrorism and get her. They were kind of like feminist Antifa. They'd go out and do a bunch of activist terrorism, get arrested, and then just get bailed right back out by wealthy backers who would put them back out on the street to continue doing what they were doing.
and these are the same people that funded the passage of the 19th Amendment.
Yes. Yep.
And again, their reasoning is they're better able to control people and sell them a solution. Where
Yes.
and usually the solution involves more control.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. What is the Golden Dawn? Theosophy, the Golden Dawn Co-Freemasonry?
Yeah, co-Freemasonry. So the Golden Dawn was an occult group in Europe. It came to America as well, but it was really popular in the UK. And it was like the Theosophical Society and some Hermetic occultists of various different occult flavors that were kind of blended into one occult religion. Aleister Crowley came out of the Golden Dawn. A lot of the other like popular occultists, the guys who ended up eventually founding Scientology originally came out of the Golden Dawn as well, and they were this is another reason that occult religion is so enticing to feminists, is because they can usually become presidents of these organizations, they can become clergy in these organizations. A lot of the feminists I talk about in the book, one of them was like a high priestess in the Golden Dawn, and she had her own little cult within it that she controlled, and she taught people how to do sex magic and all kinds of bizarre stuff. So
I've heard
if you're feminist, occult practice is very enticing to feminists because it offers power based on female sexuality.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I had a girl on my show say she did a sex spell on someone, like she placed a spell on an ex-boy. This girl was crazy. I was like, you did what? You're connecting a lot of dots here. I'm not even gonna. And so now you said a brave new world. What's that about?
So that the Brave New World is after suffrage. We're heading into the 1920s, and we go through this giant societal change where if you think of the 1920s, you think of the Great Gatsby, you think of like flapper girls, right? This is the first time women had short hair, shorter dresses, they're going to parties, they're partying with the guys, they're smoking, they're drinking. It was kind of the first mini sexual revolution. And this is around the time that they started developing birth control, diaphragms, and then later birth control pills. And I talk about Margaret Sanger and her involvement in the development of the birth control pill and the establishment of Planned Parenthood. And that chapter was really tough on me to write. I had days where I would be so mad, or I would cry, because a lot of it was lies. A lot of how they got, Planned Parenthood established in the United States, how they got the birth control pill created and marketed to women. They used a ton of lies, just so much false information, propaganda, marketing that wasn't true. And in the book, I talk a lot about it. So if you want the full story, just go ahead and pick up a copy and read it. But basically, they told this lie that women all over were just getting pregnant, and they were having, they had 13, 14, 15 babies by the time they were 20, and they were just dying in childbirth. And they made it sound like this crisis, like this female health crisis.
Wait, and it's the same system. It's the
Yeah.
same. I feel I think in systems. I don't know how to
Yeah.
describe the way I think, but it's the same system of using like something, a horrible story to control women, right?
Yes.
So what they
Yeah.
would say, this is the horrible thing that's happening. We need abortion to be legal.
Yes. So what you're referring to, and when you say you think in systems, that's very smart. It's called the Hegelian dialectic, and it's synthesis, no, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you create a problem, you market that there's a big problem going on, you get everybody upset and worried about it, then you present a solution, and then you integrate those, and then you are now in control and steering society in the way that you want it to go. And this is like a very old, very well practiced type of thing that people in power do all the time. And right around this time in history, they were really perfecting marketing and propaganda. And we had radio, which was a new medium. It was the first like social media, really. It was the first like mass media thing that we had was radio. And you could say the printing press was first, but then radio was the next big thing. So this is in the 20s and the 30s when people have radios. We're in the interwar period between World War I and World War II. And you have Margaret Sanger kind of handpicked by the establishment to be the face of these things. And they kind of used her as their little propaganda lady because she had been a nurse for a very short period of time. She was not, she really didn't have any credentials of any kind other than she was willing to do this work, and she was pretty good at public speaking, and they could kind of put her out there and use her for marketing.
So a
And
lot of
she,
times there's like men behind these movements, but they
yes.
always use
Oh yeah.
women as a pawn.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
So it was like left wing, it would have been like left wing liberalizing type of men who were really behind this and backing it. And she worked with all of the same doctors who ended up being doctors in the Nazi Action T4 euthanasia program.
Mhm.
So the birth control pill is deeply entwined with eugenics. So is abortion, like medicalized abortion, Planned Parenthood. The same people who were pushing this and developing birth control are the same ones who wanted eugenics in Europe. They wanted, racial hygiene. They wanted to get rid of anybody who, was below a certain IQ or had any sort of deformity or any kind of inheritable flaw that they didn't like. Birth control is a big part of this. And then also this Malthusian idea of overpopulation, which now has been proven to be baloney. We now are in a birth rate crisis and we're suffering a population collapse due to all
Right.
these things. But at that time, the narrative they were pushing was, this is before total industrialization of food, when you still had more poverty and hunger issues than we do now. And they would say there's not enough food for all the people, and if we don't do something about the population, there's going to be way too many people and we're going to have billions of people starving to death. So they're saying this is terrible for women, and that childbirth and motherhood destroys women's bodies, it's unhealthy, it's killing them, and it's enslaving them. Women will never be free if they have to just sit there and pop out babies. And this is when, because I have 5 kids, people call me lovely things like baby factory, say, oh, you don't know how to do anything except sit there and pop out babies, and now you're trying to peddle some crazy book. This is where you get these ideas. This is where the propaganda starts, where motherhood becomes negative, right? They start associating a lot of negative things with motherhood. You're overpopulating the planet. You're contributing to all the bad things in society because there's too many people, and this is a problem, and you need to stop, and you should have less kids. So they create birth control and market it as a solution to these problems. And same people involved. It's the Rockefeller Foundation funding all of this stuff, just like they did with women's studies. So yeah, that's the Brave New World, is when they start really taking control of reproduction in order to control women and discourage motherhood and say, no, you need to be a career woman. So this is when that propaganda really started. And you and I, you're much younger than me, but both of us were raised with this beat into our heads from the time we we're toddlers.
Yeah.
That you've got to be a career woman. You have to have your own money. If you depend on a man, all these bad things could happen. What if he leaves you? What if he cheats on you? What if he beats you up? Men are very oppressive and violent. You can't trust them, and you have to have your own money and your own security. And
Right.
if you have all these kids, oh, you're a victim, and you're stuck, and you can't go anywhere, and you can't do anything. So
Well, and I interviewed someone it was either yesterday or the day before. He wrote a book called The History of Sex, and I was surprised to learn that actually the women stopping having kids, it's matching with what you're saying, started in the 20s.
Yep.
Because I always thought like the 60s was the beginning of like the everyone always thinks it like the 60s.
Yeah,
But he said that was more of like the accumulation of a lot of trends that were already happening. So he said in the 20s,
definitely.
like before then, women used to live with their parents and then till they got married, and they would get married younger. But the 20s was when like that was really the beginning of the end of
Yes,
the
totally.
nuclear family, which kind of also lines up with like there not being waves of feminism.
Right, exactly. That I would totally agree with him on that. And in the East, so in like Russia and the communist bloc countries, because the Bolsheviks in Russia take over in 1917, and they're pushing feminism as well, but they use a different strategy in Russia and the communist bloc countries in Eastern Europe to push it. So from a communist perspective, they're saying, look, if you want to fight the bourgeoisie and empower the worker, you've got to get rid of traditional marriage and families, because property and wealth are passed down through the patriarchal lineage. So if nobody knows who their dad is, then that takes away any incentive to build cross generational wealth, to own property, to work your way up, from being a serf to being somebody who has land and owns a business or things
And
like
this
that.
is so the people in power can stay in power.
Yes, exactly. So that they can be the ones who are the landowners and control everybody. And they promise you security in return, like, oh, we'll make sure all the workers of the world are taken care of. Trust us. But they were the first to legalize in Russia, and they had a horrible woman who was in charge. She's the subject of book number 2. Her name was Alexandra Kollontai, and she was kind of like the Russian Margaret Sanger, but much worse. She made not only legal in Russia in 1918, I believe, 1919, not only legal, but paid for free up until the day of birth in every Russian hospital. So, what happened is within the span of about 10 years in Russia, they got to a point where they had 3 abortions for every 1 live birth, and it was decimating the population. And they're heading into World War II. Stalin takes power, and he has to make abortion illegal again, because he said, we're going to get completely invaded and taken over, because we just had World War I and a famine, and now we're not having any babies. Like, the birth rate had just dropped
Right.
like a rock with just this free paid for abortion everywhere. And then they also took marriage out of the church, because they basically decimated the Orthodox Christian Church in Russia, and turned they kind of had the first no fault divorce. They turned marriage into a really flimsy legal contract that you could kind of have it or not have it. You could break it and nobody cared. Um, they were kind of the first ones to institute no
Wait,
fault divorce. Yeah.
wait, and so I just realized. So another way to decimate the patriarchy is to give the kids to the woman.
Yes.
Because if the woman gets the kids, then there's no like you can't have a patriarchy when the women have all the children.
Right, right. And it takes away every motivation men have to get ahead in life. The reason that men accumulate resources is because they want to get a good wife, they want to have a family, they want to have kids to pass everything down to. If you rip that away from them, they don't really have any motivation to do anything for themselves. So then in Russia, it becomes you work for the state. Everything you're working toward in life is for the state, not for your spouse, not for your kids, not for the future of your family, not for your grandkids. So why would you want to own land? Why would you want to have money saved up that you can pass down to your children if you don't even have any rights to your own children? You're not even sure if they're yours, right? So in the 20s, they didn't have DNA tests, and they thought this was a great thing, to maybe not know who the dad was of all these kids, because the kids belong to the state now. And
Oh,
and because they're pushing all the women into factory work and out of the home, they had the first daycare system in Russia as well, called creches, where it was communal raising of children. And it was like the philosophy, they had a whole family law code that they rewrote, where the idea was that you should have babies, but only to the extent that you want to create new laborers for the state. And Alexandra Kollontai wrote that women should stop seeing themselves as mothers and start seeing themselves as labor units who can produce more labor units. And oddly, even though this is a communist idea, this is another thesis, antithesis, synthesis situation where you had capitalism in the West. So you had liberal feminism based on capitalism here, which is women should have bank accounts, women should own property, women should own companies and be CEOs and be boss babes. And then in Russia, you have women should devote themselves not to their husband, but to Lenin. This was like an actual slogan they had, that Lenin should be your true love. And then later Stalin, right? So don't have a husband, don't have a family, devote yourself to the Russian state and wed yourself to Lenin and have babies so that there's more soldiers and producers for the state. And now in modern times, we're kind of seeing a blending of those because you have Marxism here in the West blended with capitalism. So we tell women, get educated, go into a whole bunch of debt early in your life, build a career all through your fertile years. And then later, when you're 35, 40, if you can find a man and get pregnant, then you can think about that stuff. So basically, we tell them to do it backwards.
That's what the guy that wrote the his name's David Baker, but
Yeah.
he wrote the history of sex was saying too was that the biggest, because I always thought that the biggest impact on like women's birth rates was fertility, but he was saying no, that he thinks it's women going into the workforce. Because I was like
Yeah.
thinking about, I'm like, when I was 18, 19, I certainly wasn't thinking of having a family. I was going to
Right.
college. And
Right. And a
and I
couple
came
generations ago, that's what women at 18 or 19 were thinking. They were thinking, I want to get the best while I'm in my prime. I want to get the best husband I can for myself. I want to start having children with him and build a family so that in my golden years, when I'm older, I'll have people who care about me, people who will take care of me. I'll have security going into my old age. I'll have grandchildren, great grandchildren, things like that. Now we tell them, no, you have to start building your 401k and your investment portfolio and your career during those years. Don't be worried about family. In fact, we tell women that they are losers, that they are stupid, that they are silly if they have, like, what happens when a girl gets pregnant at 18? Everybody around her goes, oh, her life's over.
yeah, so
RIP.
true. Yeah.
It's just like, oh, she's going to be a loser now. She's never going to be anything. This is something that I heard too, because I had my first daughter when I was 20. And I was always in like advanced classes and like smarty pants kids programs growing up and things like that. And I didn't like school because I figured out early on that it was not for smart people and that it wasn't about learning really.
Um,
So so I didn't want to go to college by the time I got college age. And I had my first daughter at 20, and I was like shocked by how much I loved being a mom. I was shocked because I was a tomboy and I was never like overly feminine really, but I wasn't a feminist. I just wasn't thinking politically, I guess. But I loved being a mom. And I
were
was,
you a daddy's girl?
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, 'cause I was a really big tomboy too, but I find it's like usually the oldest girls in families and they're like close with their dads and like
Yep,
raised
that's
by a
me.
boy. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
was between two boys, I was close with my dad and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I had my daughter and I was like, I remember going to drive her to daycare. She's like 6 weeks old and I'm supposed to go back to my crap job that I don't care about. And I'm driving to daycare going, wait, so I'm going to take this tiny person who depends on me for everything and I can't think of anything but her and I don't really want to do anything except take care of her. I'm going to go drop her off with some other lady, pay that lady half of what I'm going to make today at a job I don't care about so that she can do the job I want to be doing. And I thought, this is the dumbest system ever. Who came up with this? It seems really inefficient. It's really painful. Like the baby is crying, I'm crying, and all the women around me go, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to it. The baby will get used to it and you'll get used to it. And I'm like, but why? What, like, this
Mhm.
seems really dumb. Why is it set up so that I have to go back to work in order to like live? And, so that's when I really started questioning things. But those things are done intentionally now. So the average, first of all, women get more degrees than men now, which you probably have heard a lot of these stats, but more degrees are earned by women than men now. The average woman graduates from college with about $36,000 in debt. She makes an average of 40K a year in the United States, so that's not very good for that much debt. And then, so what are you looking at when you're in your mid 20s? Well, I have to build my career so I have any hope of paying off this debt, which means I don't have time for like getting married and having kids, and then to think about taking time away from your career to have children. Well, you're not going to be keeping up with your wages. You're not going to be considered relevant or up to date in whatever field you're working in. So a lot of women just don't ever get there. They're told that to be a good, smart girl and to be successful, these are the steps you have to do. And you'd better have a career and your own money first. That's like a prerequisite to having children. But what you might notice, we don't ever fear monger career women about everything that could go wrong being a career woman. We do that to mothers, right? We tell them all the horrible things that might happen, all the regrets they might have. But we don't tell career woman, oh, what if you go into a field that you decide you don't like later? Or what if you earn a degree in a field that becomes obsolete and then you can't find work and you have all this debt? What if you go to school to be a violinist and then you break your hand and can never play again? Like we don't fear monger women to death about all the things that can go wrong if they choose career and don't have a family. We only do it to women who choose to have a family. And I think that that's silly because now, like, I mean, you talk to women all the time that they get older, they hit the wall, they're in their 40s, they're alone, and they don't love their career. And they do wish that they had done something different, but now the time is gone and they can't do anything about it. And I get letters, emails, and DMs from women about this all the time. They read my book, then they message me and they go, I got played. I was fooled into this. Like I totally fell for it. And now I'm 40 or 50, or even one lady in her 60s. And they're like, there's nothing I can do about it now. I'm just stuck with it.
I would love to actually interview some of them because it's really hard to find women that admit it.
I know.
It's really hard to find girls that actually like will tell the younger generation don't do that.
Yeah. Well, and they'll write me an email because they'll say, I can't talk about this to the people around me. I can't tell my parents or my friends that I have all these regrets. And then I get letters from younger women. Like I got one from a girl who was in dental school to become a dentist. She was in like her last year of dental school. And she said, I became Christian a couple years ago, and for the last 2 years, all I can think about is getting married and having kids. Like that's really what I want, like down to my soul. That's what I really want most. And I don't feel like I can do that because I've invested all this time and all this money. My parents will be disappointed and they won't understand. They will think that I've gone crazy and lost my mind and that I'm making a mistake. And I just don't think I can handle all the pressure from everyone around me if I don't go like leave college and start a dental practice. But she's saying to me, if I start this dental practice, well, it takes years to build it. And then once you've built it, what are you going to do? Just walk away from it? Like just dump it to have kids? So she felt so stuck. And this is a girl who's like 21 years old and she is in her prime. And it's because of the propaganda and how we teach women about not only the history of women and their status in life and society, but what they should be doing now. And it's like they're just hit with all of this propaganda throughout their whole life that I've heard this all the time. Oh, you're just a stay-at-home mom. Because I stayed home for 12 years and homeschooled too. And even some of the more conservative women around me just thought that I was nuts. They were like, you're going to regret it. And it's a shame it's a shame you never did anything with your life, that kind of silliness.
No,
so I just,
I've heard that. Like I grew up in a pretty conservative like area. And I would say I've even heard that, oh, she's just a I've heard that so many times.
yeah. This idea that you're not doing anything with your life. It's like, first of all, when I have 5 kids, do you think I'm just sitting on the couch all day? What do you think I'm doing? You think I'm just laying on the couch watching soap operas? No, I'm busier than most career women with my 5 kids. But now that they're older, my oldest is 22, my youngest is 11. I'm so glad I put in all that hard work in the front end of my life because now I'm reaping all the benefits of it. And as I do get older, I'm really looking forward to grandkids, to having a big family. I'm not going to have to, be alone in my later years. And my kids keep me young and active, and life is great. I have a great marriage. Although feminists around the world are constantly writing me to tell me that they hope, my husband dies in a fire and I'm left destitute, or they hope that he leaves me for a younger woman. And it's like, so they see you happy and married with kids and they're angry. And I'm like, wait, I thought your life is awesome. I thought you love being a boss. Why do you care if I'm happily married with kids? Why do you want that to be ripped away from me if you're so happy, right?
What happened during the sexual revolution?
So the sexual revolution was like a culmination of all the stuff leading up to it, where now we have television. And strangely, the CIA during the 60s decides to get involved in the Cultural Revolution. In fact, the CIA and other intelligence agencies helped steer it. They were involved in a lot of the bands and movies, like a lot of the pop culture at the time. A lot of people don't know that a lot of the popular hippie bands that all the boomers were listening to were CIA creations. There's a really good book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon about that. And the CIA also pushed feminism. So they recruited Gloria Steinem out of Smith College in the 60s. She was sponsored also by the Ford Foundation. They kind of worked together with her, and they kind of handpicked her again to be the new mouthpiece for this new I wouldn't even call it a wave, because like you said, it's like a continuous wave. It had different phases, right? But in the 60s, they kind of handpicked her to push this, because of the people they had to choose from. They had like Betty Friedan, who was an older, frumpier lady. She wrote The Feminine Mystique, and that book did pretty well, but she wasn't exactly someone you'd put on TV that the younger generation wants to emulate. But Steinem had like highlights in her hair, and she, they actually had her work at the Playboy Mansion doing some espionage there. And so they'd put her in like, she was kind of cool for the time. I know that's weird to think about Gloria Steinem being cool, but in the 60s, she was kind of like a cool new woman. They always have different versions of the new woman. They had a new woman in the 1800s, a new woman in the 20s, and then a new woman in the 60s. And she kind of helped really push feminism into the mainstream using TV and magazines like Ms. Magazine, which was started with CIA funding, and make normalized. If you guys know anything about the history of Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade was very engineered. It was also built on a bunch of lies. It was not what we're told it is. There was a lot of shenanigans going on there. So there's just this another big push of social engineering to tell women, we have gender studies now. You can go to college, and you should go to college, and women are oppressed by having to stay in the home, and you don't want to be a suburban housewife. And this is when they start marketing the trope of the suburban housewife. And this is so funny, because everybody has this weird idea that 50s housewives were miserable and they were all on pills, right? They were all on mommy's little helper pills. Okay, well, right now, 25% of all adult American women are on a psych. So apparently, liberating women and shoving them into the career world didn't fix that. And I strongly question the stats of every stay-at-home mom in the 50s being on drugs. That wasn't the case. It was generally more like entertainers and upper class people who had access to doctors they could pay for barbiturates who did that. But even if you believe that, clearly that problem didn't get solved. So the sexual revolution was like the final push for getting people to procreate as much as possible outside of marriage, because it destroys pair bonding, it ruins the institution of marriage. It does the same thing it kind of did in Russia, which is eliminate parentage through the man, right? If men don't ever know, or even if they're just not certain that whoever they're sleeping with, the baby's going to be theirs, it just really takes away a lot of the impetus for men to be productive and gain things for themselves. So it was just another push for getting women into college, getting them into the workforce. And between 1960 and 1980, the workforce doubled, and it was in large part due to women leaving the home and going into the workforce en masse for the first time. Yes, they did that a little bit during the wars, but after the wars were finished, they would go back home. The 60s and 70s were the first time that women left the house and didn't come back. and it gave them this huge expanding tax base. It expanded the GDP and the economy, which of course the elites love to do. And it gave them a whole new way to propagandize and get more participation from women in voting. Because even after voting was, voting rights were given to women, it took a while to get women into voting booths. They still weren't super into it, and they had to use a lot of propaganda to push women into voting booths too. So yeah, it just was kind of that final push to liberalize and get the sexuality piece is so important. It's so important if you want this atomized culture that we live in now, because like all the women that you have on and that you talk to all the time, the girls who are on the whatever podcast, this thing we see right now, which is exciting to me, of these girls who are vapid, like empty-headed, only thinking about their Instagram likes, only thinking about their body count and their fake eyelashes and their lip fillers and all this stuff. It creates this huge consumer market too. That's another big thing. Yeah. So like right now, 80% of all consumer spending is controlled by women.
Right.
Boomer age women are going to see, they're going to be the first generation to have a double windfall, meaning when their parents die, they're probably going to inherit something. And then they're probably going to outlive their spouse or get divorced. So they're going to get money from the spouse too. So boomer age women have massive control over consumer spending in America, which is why almost all the marketing is angled towards them.
What age is boomer aged women?
Would have been 1948. So like the end of the war to, I believe, 1970.
Okay.
And then Gen X would be like 70 to like 80. So yeah, boomer age women post World War II, born in the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have the sexual revolution. Now women are leaving the home.
Yeah.
And then it says Pandora's box, return to goddess.
Yeah. So what we did with sexual liberation was kind of like opening Pandora's box, if you're familiar with that Greek myth or Roman myth, of opening Pandora's box and letting things out. You can't put them back in, like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So now we've got this liberated culture where women and the sexual revolution, the other big thing I should mention about it is that it broke the contract. So I just interviewed my grandma, who's 97, on my YouTube channel. And I was talking to her about what life was like when she was young. First, I asked her if women, like in her social circles as a teen and in her 20s, did women feel oppressed? And she said, no, we never did. She was born in 1928. Yeah, 1928. So this is the 30s. And she's like, no, we didn't think about it that way at all. We never felt oppressed. And asked her, like, what was it like courting and trying to get married? And she's explaining it as like, yeah, all of us girls were hoping to get a nice fella. We want someone from a nice family with a good reputation, somebody who has a good chance of providing, a good career ahead of him, or some kind of financial security in his future, someone who we share our religious values with and things like that. Now what we have is not like that at all. It's like hookup culture, it's body counts, it's swiping on all the dating apps and things like that.
I had a realization with the guy I interviewed yesterday, where he was saying, like, when women have security, they go for looks.
Yeah.
So the problem is, it's like when we have a job or we have money, we then go for looks. Well, here's the problem. Women find 80% of men unattractive.
Exactly.
So then you're all going for the same 20% of men.
Right.
And so then it's going a little bit more back towards polygamy until women hit their, like, 31 is the average age of first marriage in the UK. Then they go back to I think it's like 28 or 20, like the new numbers, it's like 28 or 29 now for women. Yeah. And so then we go back to monogamy, but like, and then we go for the security, but then it's like the problem is the men, and it's not necessarily women's fault, because we've all been brainwashed for this. Right. But it's like when women are left to our own devices, we don't pick for security, which is like when families were more involved, like security would be a bigger pick.
Right. It was very future oriented. You're thinking about the quality of life of your children, you're thinking about your grandchildren's futures, you're thinking very long term. And now the thinking is very short term because we broke the social contract among women. So 100 years ago, when men are looking for chaste, young people to marry, young women to marry who they can have kids with, right? That's what they're looking for. They're looking for youth, chastity, and somebody who's like probably agreeable, wants to be a mother, things like that, has a good reputation. Then it incentivized all the women to mostly remain virgins till they got married. Not that there weren't some who didn't, but it was like a knock against you,
Yeah.
right? And it
I
was
found
good
it
to be a
was,
virgin, and it's
they
not
said
like that anymore.
1920, they said 1920 was 15% admitted to premarital sex. So I was like,
Yeah.
even let's just say the women are liars. Even if we double it,
Right.
that's still 2 out of 3 aren't. Or
Yeah.
like are virgins, sorry.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So what happened when in the 60s when they pushed the counterculture sexual revolution, if you could just bump that number up a little bit, let's say 35% of the women are willing to have sex before marriage, well, they've ruined it for all the rest of us, right? Because now all the men are just going to go to that 35% because it seemed like a good deal to men. I think now men are realizing it wasn't, but at the time it was like, wait, I can just have sex and I don't have to marry her first. I don't have to commit. I don't have to provide. I don't have to have resources. I can just have sex. That sounds
Right.
awesome.
Well, it's bad for most. It's just a small percentage of men that get to do that anyway.
Right, right.
The other ones get to pick up the pieces after with the
Yeah,
wife that like that's more damaged, that's you know, like that's been through, like that's been passed around by the other guys, and then another
yeah,
guy gets her after. And
yeah.
the other and that's like when I would learned like we're starting to see a rise in like male virginity.
Yeah, everything is kind of going like this. It's just getting very skewed and bent in the wrong direction. And I always say there's a reason why feminism never took hold, because as we just explained, these ideas are very old, they've been around forever, but feminism couldn't take hold until we had technology, because technology is what gives women this illusion that they don't need men. I just debated a feminist, a Twitch streamer gal, a month or two ago, and I asked her, because she said there's no difference between the genders and women can do everything men can do now. And I said, wait a minute, you don't think there's hard jobs that only men do? You don't think there's like, the guys who keep the electrical grid going, the guys who do the oil rig drilling, all these like difficult, labor intensive, dangerous jobs that men still only do? And she's like, yeah, women can do them because we have like tools or whatever. It's like this, we can do it too. And I asked her, okay, so do you think we could just have an all female crew go out in an ice storm and keep the power grid up? And she was like, yeah, why not? Like, she really didn't think that was a problem. And so it's technology. Like I tell women all the time, you get in your car that a man designed and built, and that you take it to a man anytime it breaks or it needs maintenance, and you drive on the roads that men created and built to your office building that men created and built, and you go sit down at your desk at your computer, and if your computer has any issues, you call the IT guy to come and fix your computer. Like, yes, you do need men. You totally need men, because they built this advanced world that you live in that gives you the illusion that you're independent. If we had like some kind of disaster where the power grid went down and we didn't have all these modern things, there would be no such thing as feminists. Every feminist would get on her knees in front of the closest guy who could provide and protect, because we'd be reset back to before technology. So it's really technology that gives women this illusion that they don't need men. And yeah, I get it. Like, you can go about your day and pay your bills, and you can make money off your Instagram, and you can have your career and things like that. But we've seen that doesn't solve the problems, and it hasn't made women happier. There's something called the paradox of female happiness, where the more liberated women are, the more miserable they seem to get. The more they rely on psych drugs, the more they need therapy, the lonelier they report that they are, and they're living longer. This is the other thing. Like, women are living into their 80s regularly. Most of us do. And you are building your whole entire life around this very limited portion of time where you have a lot of sexual power, And you're not thinking at all about what you're going to do in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? So these women age out, and then it's like, oh, I guess living in my apartment and ordering DoorDash with my cat isn't as awesome as I thought it would be. We all know those stories of women who've hit the wall. So it's like, not only that, but now we're seeing children being raised in homes where no one's ever married. You have mom's boyfriends coming and going. You have dad's girlfriends coming and going. And in those situations, the instance of child is far higher than when children are living with both biological parents. Not only is the instance of child abuse higher, it's more severe. Anytime you have a non-biological parent, like an adult who's not a bio parent living with children, the risk of abuse goes way up and the severity of the abuse goes way up. And we never used to have kids on antidepressants, ADHD meds, psych, all this kind of stuff. It was considered extremely rare prior to 1970. If you look at the old DSMs, it was extremely rare to have depressed kids and things like that. And now it's super common.
Well, and you know what I was thinking about? We're almost outsourcing families because it's
Yeah.
like, you know, like what was a therapist before? You would talk to like, because I was thinking like women would have an average of 5 kids 100 years ago. So if
Yeah.
you had a problem, you would go to your mother, your father, or one of your siblings, or one of your million
Yeah.
cousins, because your dad, like your mom and your dad, and then you all had a vested interest in not letting that information get out to the public. Where now it's like some therapists will go to the press, like the Kardashian therapy, you know? Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, but you don't want your sister to look too crazy because then everyone's going to associate you with the crazy sister and you have a vested interest to tell her the truth too. Where the therapist is just going to tell you what you want to hear because their vested interest is for you to keep coming back and paying them. But I have a vested interest in my family not looking crazy to the world because then I look crazy. It's like, what do they say? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I saw like 1920s dating advice. And the woman, like one of them to women was like, don't tell the guy if your mom's crazy.
Right. Because then he'll be afraid that you're going to be crazy.
Yeah. And
or he'll have a crazy mother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking like in a way where a lot of like new industries is us outsourcing like families.
Yeah, well, and this is the other thing that's so insane to me that I say to feminists in debates. I do a lot of online debates. And you know, they'll say, "Well, I should be able to have a career and follow my dreams." And first of all women think that they're going to have the high-paying office job with the corner window office and they're going to be flying off to Paris or New York to have power lunches where they're going to, you know, close the deal and make all this money. They think they're going to have this exciting career. And if you look at careers for women, from 2020 and 1920, they're almost exactly the same. The only thing we did was swap out farm labor for HR work. So the vast majority of working women, this is what they do. They're a waitress, a teacher, a bookkeeper, a retail worker, a nurse, all the same stuff they did in the home, right? Nursing, childcare, daycare, bookkeeping, all the things you would have done for your family, but now you're doing it for a corporation, you're paying taxes, and you have to pay daycare if you do want to have kids. So then let's think about daycare. You want independence. You want to be able to go have your career. But what about the woman you're paying to raise your kids? What about her independence? You're just swapping out one woman who's the mother for a random other woman who's not the mother. And you think she is going to do as good a job as you would do for $10 an hour for kids that don't belong to her? What about all those women? So it's some of the Marxist feminists do have a point when they critique capitalist feminism because they're like, wait, you're just it's just very classist. You just want to move up a class and you don't care if these lower class women have to take on all the burden of childbearing and child raising, and that is what happens. So it's like you've just swapped mom for some other random lady and you're still doing the same types of work in most cases that you would have been doing if you were in the home. It's just that now the corporation gets to profit off of you and the government gets to take a bunch of your income and you have to pay out to daycare. So we outsource motherhood and family life. You're exactly right.
What do you think of, like, because a lot of women will say, well, I have to work because you need two incomes to survive today.
Yeah, feminism created that situation. We used to have, men would have a family wage. In fact, in pre-World War II Germany, they did have to put some laws on the books to restrict mothers from working outside the home. And the reason was because they found this huge new labor pool of women was displacing men. And so men's employment in factories, because this is a very industrial and agricultural economy still at the time, men were getting displaced. So men's unemployment was going up. Depression and suicide among men was going up, and their wages were going down. So it was also at that time in Germany depressing the birth rate, which they didn't want. So they had some laws on the books where if you were married or if you were a mother, you weren't supposed to work for a certain amount of time unless there was an exception. So we've created an economy that is based on an individual wage, not a family wage, because all of the women are in the
Oh,
workplace.
right. I never thought of it
So
like that. It's
yeah.
based on an individual wage instead of a family wage. I never thought
Yeah.
about it like that.
That's why in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you could have a man who was a janitor at a school could afford to have a family with 4 kids and support them. You can't have that now because of what doubling the market pool has done to wages. That's why wages haven't gone anywhere really since like the 70s, and we've had very depressed wages. And now also because we've pushed women into academia so much, women are getting most of the degrees, they're earning more. So it's very hard to find a man who can make more than you and support a whole family. And men don't have a lot of incentive to do that, you know? So we've
Right,
just
that's what I
created.
was saying. Because what do they get at the end of it? And like, like, because it's not like they get like the average is in the UK anyway. It's a 31-year-old.
Right.
What? So you maybe get 1 or 2 kids.
Yeah.
She's been doing God knows what the last 10 years, and then the women will always come at me. I'm like, look, there's exceptions to every
Sure,
rule,
of course.
right? I know it's not every woman, but it's like let's just like guys, like because I'll say women in 2023. The purity's gone. Like, let's just call a spade a spade. Like, only 85% of us were virgins on our wedding nights 100 years ago. Like, you
Right.
can't say that we don't bring that anymore.
No, we don't. And then, of course, everybody's familiar with the stats that women initiate the vast majority of divorce. Among college educated couples, it's even higher. And then the marriage failure rate is very high. And a lot of people just aren't even bothering to get married anymore at all. The rate of marriage has gone down. So it's like,
Why? Why would they? Like, to be honest, I'm doing a
yeah,
documentary on the court system in the UK, and I know it's similar in the US. It's like
yeah,
I'm looking at it from a guy's point of view. Like, marriage isn't marriage anymore. It's not marriage if it ends after 8 years on average. Like
right.
that's not like marriage is supposed to
No.
be. We're stuck together
Mhm.
forever, and there's nothing you could do. And guys could even get over women, like I think men would honestly accept the women not being as pure, not being as hot because we're fatter. Like,
Yeah,
I think honestly, if we couldn't leave, but it's like they'll get into marriage and then leave, take the kids and take all their money.
yeah,
Why would you do it? And the
right.
sad
Because
part is they can't even avoid it by not getting married. Because I spoke to a divorce attorney and he's like, I could get married tomorrow. Marriage does not scare me. That's what he told me. He's like, I'll get a prenup. It'll be fine. What I'm afraid of is children, because when you have children, those are not your kids, they're her kids.
right. And then you have no control over what other scumbag men she's dragging into the house. Like that happened with my parents, where my mom left for no good reason. She just wanted a younger guy. She found a younger guy, kicked my dad out of the house, moved this younger person in who was closer to my age than her age. And my dad could do nothing about it. He had no rights because this is the 80s. And there's this, and the guy was creepy, right? So it's like now there's this creeper dude in the house with my dad's kids. My dad's fighting like with everything he's got in the court system. And they're just like, sorry, and there's like nothing he can do about it. It's like beyond heartbreaking, it's beyond horrible. And another thing that I like to talk about when we're talking about feminism and how the world that we've created with it is that there was a natural balance of power that people don't talk about prior to feminism. So throughout history, yes, men have had the monopoly on force, because they're physically bigger, stronger, and prior to technology, especially, they did dominate in that way. However, all throughout history, now that we have genetic studies, we now know that every living human being right now has twice as many female ancestors as they do male ancestors. That's because historically 80% of women were able to reproduce, because all you had to do historically to reproduce was be fertile for the most part, right? And then only 40% of men ever got to reproduce, because even historically men had to compete for women, they had to compete for mates, and a lot of them died in wars. Men are very expendable. They've always been seen as very expendable all throughout history. So only about 40% of men who've ever lived have gotten the chance to reproduce. So just by that, women have a huge genetic advantage. We have a big advantage in passing our genes on. Then you're looking at men might have the monopoly on, force and money and maybe like government, but women had tremendous power prior to feminism because we're generally the gatekeepers of sex, right? Women were still kind of the choosers and the gatekeepers of sex, and we get to select the mates. And we have a tremendous amount of power during our fertile years. We have a ton of influence. We had influence on the way children were raised, on the way society was run. They were still the community organizers. If anything was happening, with church life, school life, community life, historically, women were doing those things. We were the caretakers and the ones doing the nursing. So we had a lot of influence socially. Like, we were still the ones that were kind of running social life for the most part. Now, what has happened is that we don't have equality, we have massive inequality. So now we see women dominating in family courts. They, like we already mentioned, they have the majority of degrees now. They do better in school from the time they're in preschool. Girls always do better in school than boys do. If a man and a woman get convicted of the exact same crime with the same circumstances, the woman usually gets 40% less jail time. They get less harsh punishments in criminal courts. They win in family courts. They control 80% of consumer spending. And they're still the mate selectors. They are still the gatekeepers of sex. They're still the ones that get to decide who procreates, and they own the children, like you said. So now what we have is massive inequality, where women kind of control everything and have the upper hand in everything, and society is very gynocentric, and men are still expendable. They have less power than ever, less control than ever. They can do practically nothing to defend themselves in a legal situation. Women are allowed to be, physically abusive, and it's very tolerated. Women can be emotionally abusive, and it's very tolerated. Where if the same thing was reversed, and if have you ever seen like a man whose woman is just like awful to him and browbeats him and is emotionally abusive and manipulative, and everyone just goes, well, he should stand up for himself more. But if the man does that to the woman, it's like, oh, he's a monster, he's horrible. Same thing if the woman leaves the family, like my mom did. If the mom takes off, it's like, well, she had to be happy. Don't you want her
She
to be
had her
happy?
reasons. What was the reason? What did
Right.
he
What did he do to deserve it? But if the man leaves, nobody asks that. They just go, oh, he's a deadbeat, he's a scumbag, he's an irresponsible POS, right? So we don't have equality. Now what we have is massive inequality.
Well, and the other thing, I got red pilled on a this year. Oh my gosh. Okay, because when a girl said she was I would just believe her. I would, because when someone tells you that, you're like, oh, what happened? And so what I started asking, like someone in my comments said, no, you need to ask more questions because it's kind of like awkward, you don't really want to, but I'm me. So I was like, all right, I'll start asking questions. So I would always ask the next question I would ask, well, did you press charges? No. Did you ever hit him? Well, and so what I found out is the majority of these women also hit him. Yep. So now you're just beating each other because it doesn't make sense to me. If someone punches me in the face, and if a guy really wanted to kill you, like it wouldn't be that hard.
No.
So yeah, and so then I started like asking more questions. The craziest thing happened. Okay, one day this girl keeps messaging me. Please, because the stream I did with her, right? She said I said, like, you left him, he wasn't abusive. Like, did he hit the kids? She said no. Great. Okay. So now later she keeps messaging me. Can you take down that stream? Can you take down that stream? I don't take down streams. I'm going to tell you, if you say something, and I value my time too much. If you say something crazy on one of my streams, no, I paid my producer. No, that's not happening. I take down streams for nobody, just so you know. See, you seem like a level-headed woman. As if you don't want something on the internet, don't say it on camera. Okay.
Right.
Right, but
Yeah.
not all women have that. So then okay, and I'm like, this is so weird. She's messaging all these people I know. I just keep blocking her because this is not. I'm like, goodbye. I'll never talk to you again. Now it turns out I start doing the court system thing, and I find out that women here are rewarded. And I knew she was going through like a custody thing with her ex. Okay. Basically, she started making more money than him, thought she was better, took the kids. And I knew that she said something because that was why I asked if he was because she said that her ex can't see the kids and the kids are better for it. Even the teachers say they're better. And but at the last time, like I was just kind of confused, you know. If I had to do that again, I would have much more pointed questions, let me tell you. But I'm new to this. I go to the court documentary. Well, they're telling me that women get a free lawyer if they accuse of abuse, and you can go to family court and accuse a guy of with no evidence. And basically, this is how women are getting custody of their children.
Yeah.
Well, the wheels start turning. Is this why this woman wants me to take the stream down? Because
Right.
she wants to go to the lawyer. Now I was like, I'm petty. I am a petty looking, and I know we all have our like, you know, like I struggle with feminine. I'm a tomboy, all right?
Yeah.
I can be a petty bitch. I'm just saying. I'm like, you are lucky I don't find your case online.
And
You
be
know,
like, oh, Judge, I have something to say.
yeah, I'm like, you're
Right.
lucky. I might. I think about it sometimes. I'm like, if I
Or
knew
maybe just find her ex and DM him the video and be like, hey, psst.
girl, that's because I have 7,000 videos. I don't know if he found it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, I'll do, but she never said her last name. So I was like, if I ever find it out, I promise I'll look. I'll look. Nobody.
Yeah, hopefully he'll find that out.
Yeah.
But it's so true.
Yeah, publicly, I want all the women to know that come on my show. No, I'm not taking the stream down. If you pull this on me, I will send it if I have the chance. I'm not going to go out of my way, you know, but I'll send it. Don't tempt me.
I approve. No, it's just women can just tear apart families with impunity and with no thought. There's never any thought of what it's doing to the kids, what it's doing to the man, what it's doing to the whole rest of the extended family, because divorces affect the whole entire family. And women just feel so completely vindicated. Just, I'm not happy. I'm not happy, so I'm just going to destroy. And this is something you see all the time where it's like a woman will get divorced or she'll kick her baby daddy to the curb. And then she'll lose 40 pounds. She'll put all this effort into herself. She'll go back to school. She'll like do all this self-improvement stuff and be like, I'm finding myself. And I'm like, why didn't you do that before the divorce? Because maybe the divorce wouldn't have happened and maybe you wouldn't have been so miserable if you were on this self-improvement kick while you were married. But no, you're doing it because you're hoping to attract a higher status guy. Don't lie and say it's for, I want to be beautiful for myself. No, you are getting lip fillers and losing weight and getting a new pair of boobs and all this other stuff because you're hoping to level up from the last guy that you just kicked out. That's what you're doing. Whereas if women were putting this kind of effort into themselves, into the current marriage they have, they might find out it's awesome. Like my husband and I say all the time, because he's a streamer too. He's got like a popular debate channel. And we talk about this all the time, that we trained each other. Like when we got married, we were both good wives, and good husbands aren't born, they're made. Like I had to kind of help him learn how to be a good husband to me, and he had to help me learn how to be a good wife to him. And we put the effort in together and worked on ourselves together throughout the last 15 years, 16 years we've been together. That's what you do. And then you end up very happy because you have this intact family. You've built something that's lasting. You do have the security and the stability, but it's still fun and exciting and you still enjoy each other. So it totally can be done. It's just that we program women that the minute they're having a bad day, or if they don't feel good about themselves, it's got to be the man. You know, you need a change. You got to like get rid of him and go find yourself. You need to go eat, pray, love, and do a bunch of traveling and sleeping around to find yourself, and then you'll be happy. And that's not the path to happiness. And you can see that because these women are not happy.
And I have to say, all right, I get a lot of flack because I always come down on the women, but
Me
I have
too.
to say, like, everything is women's fault in society. Now, why do I say this, right? Because, when you look at the numbers, it's really hard to argue with.
Yeah.
I spoke and I do this, I talk to people I'm a talker, and so there's a homeless shelter down the street from me, and there's all these crackheads, and I'm not, I'm like, oh, I'm so tired of the crackheads. And so, I just decided to ask. I was like, let me ask the guy who runs the shelter. I have a question.
Yeah.
Why are they in this situation? And I was curious. My first premise, because I started to have sympathy for homeless people because I used to never have it, because I just felt like I'm a go-getter. Like, you can go get a job. Why are you in this? And I had a couple relatives that were homeless, and knowing them, it was really the choices. Like, one was
Right.
homeless because every person she lived with, she would rob. Well, now you're on the streets because you stole from every family member that took you. So,
Right.
that's my view. I start doing the documentary on the court system. Oh, wow. So now I'm finding out that a lot of the homeless men were wrecked in divorce.
Yeah.
Okay, that humanizes it a little bit. So I go and I ask the homeless guy, or the homeless shelter guy. He's ran the shelter for like 20, 30 years. My premise was maybe a lot of them are divorced. Let me ask. No, not. He says no, not divorced. I would say maybe that. I think he told me, if he had to guess, like 20%, roughly, right? Still a significant number, but not the majority. He told me the majority are people that were in the care system, from women with multiple baby fathers and just broken families. So whose choice was that to ruin the family? The woman. So now
Right.
it's like we can connect all these big problems in society to choices that women are making, right? At
Yes.
least the single childless women ruin themselves. Now there's some after effects on the whole system as a
Right.
whole,
Right.
on whoever's got to take care of you when you're old. But for the most part, at least they go be miserable by
Yeah.
your lonesome. However, the single mothers are the worst, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because they put their happiness above, I don't know, protecting their kids from abuse. I'm looking up all these stats of single mother
Yeah.
homes, which are worse than single father homes.
Yes.
Um, and it's like all of the things that, like, the kids are more likely to do: a woman, go to jail, go to prison. It's like 80% of all prison inmates were from single mother homes.
Yes.
Thinking about it, I'm like, why would that happen? Well, because women were coddling, where the men, they're disciplinary more. Like,
Right. Right.
like, I've seen I've seen someone, they used to whip one of my sisters with a spoon. She kind of deserved it, but you still have that, like, oh no, well, that's what the men need to be there for, to discipline the kids. But when you have all these young men, and then that have never been disciplined in their life by a man, they go through amok the crime. You
Right. Right.
And then I'm finding out that all these guys too, they get played by the system, because they get preyed on by these single mothers that need a sucker. So they find another guy that was raised by a single mother to
Yep.
be the next generation of child support. And
Yes.
so I'm not even trying to hate on women. I'm just trying to say, like, okay, this is what happened when we got power.
Yes. Exactly.
Apparently,
Right.
there's bad men and there's bad women. And I do think women are more
Sure.
spiteful than men. I think we're a bit more emotional.
Yeah.
So it's like, if, okay, I'm not a stealer, right? I don't steal. I'm not a stealer. But if every day I watch everyone steal from the Apple store and take a free iPhone every day, and there's no repercussions, and they're paraded and rewarded for it.
Yeah.
Even me, and I like to think I have a strong moral compass, even me, I'm still human, right? I'm gonna still think about taking that iPhone. Think,
Right.
everyone else is doing it. So
Right. It's
somebody's cheering
normalized.
them on. And on
Yes.
top of that, you're not going to jail for it. Why don't I do it too?
Yeah.
And so that's what I realized with the system that's built. That's what they're doing with women. It's like, it's not necessarily that, you know, I do think women are more spiteful than men, but by and large, it doesn't mean women are horrible people, but the systems we give them make them horrible people. Because I realize
Yes.
there's like a bailout. I think in systems. So I'm like, it's like a system of bailouts, because if the
Right.
girls have the debt, they get bailed out by the government. It's like every bet. If we sleep around, there's birth control. If we have a kid, there's some simp which simps are a big problem too. Like,
Yes.
men raised their standards and said, you know what? Like, imagine, okay, if you had a kid outside of wedlock, or you left the guy you made a kid with, which I'm finding out too, the deadbeat dad is a myth, because these men wanted to be in the lives, but the mom wouldn't let them, like a bunch of them
Right.
anyway. But so I'm like, if the men said, you know what? No, we are not dating single mothers. That's your bed. Lie in it. You're a harlot now. But the problem is they keep dating them.
Right. I know.
So they and I want to say, oh, you'll never be taken seriously. Well, you're not going to be taken seriously by the 20% of men. But let's just call a spade a spade. 80% of men, maybe it's 70. There's a percentage of men that'll still take you, and especially young naive men, right?
Yep.
That have no idea. They're just, trotting along.
Yeah.
They were raised by a single mother, so they're like, yeah, let me try.
Yeah.
Someone on my show, and I was telling him, I'm like, you are a single childless man. There is no reason you should date a single mother. And they're like,
Right.
no, they're like fighting me. And I'm like, no, why
Yeah.
would you want to do that?
Well, I'll tell you why in a second, but the last chapter of my book, I go over all these numbers. I go over a ton of stats and a ton of numbers because, like you, I love those because they're very hard to argue with. And so the last chapter of the book is basically, let's take a look at this last 100 years of feminism since it became the dominant thing, and let's assess, what we've gotten out of it and where things stand. And all the stuff we've been talking about, all these numbers, we know for certain that kids raised by single moms are at higher risk for everything from criminal activity to addiction problems to mental illness to poverty. Any risk in life, they are more susceptible to being raised by single moms. And are there some single moms who are single moms not by choice? Yes. At one time, that was me. My oldest two, their dad left. It was not my choice. I tried to do everything I could to prevent it. He was in a bad place with himself, and it happened. We were really young. But most women, that's not the case. Most women are like my mother, where it's just like, I'm bored or I'm unhappy with myself, so I want someone who makes me feel sexy. I want someone who makes me feel alive. I want, somebody more entertaining or younger, or Mr. Johnson next door makes me feel sexy. So sorry, kids, but daddy has to move out and you can never see him again, because at that point it becomes about keeping the new guy, right? And having the old guy around, the new guy doesn't like that. It complicates matters. And you have to demonize the ex to justify why you left. So that's what always happens. And when you talk about men who defend this stuff and defend dating single moms, I get the same thing. I will get men who come for me and are super angry with me and take issue. I had one that used to follow me everywhere I went online and like leave nasty gram comments and say awful things about me. And of course, it turns out he was raised by a single mom.
Yeah.
And what happens is these boys who are raised by single moms are always told that, sorry, little Johnny, but your childhood must be sacrificed for mommy's happiness. I'm sorry you have to spend all day in daycare. I'm sorry that you only get to see your dad twice a month, if that, if you're lucky. I'm sorry you don't like my new boyfriend who beats you or treats you like crap or just doesn't give a shit about you. I'm sorry you've had to go through my succession of multiple boyfriends that I've had, right? So many kids are being raised with, oh, mom's new boyfriend just moved in. Oh, 6 months later, he's out and the new boyfriend is in 2 months later. And there's this revolving door of strange men coming and going their whole lives. So they're abused, they're neglected, or they're just exposed to a lot of dysfunctional, gross behavior and hypergamy from women. So they think, not only do they think it's normal, but they defend it because they're protecting their mother. And this is like a huge thing that I see with like more of the simp type of men. Every time I talk to them and I can get to their life story, they're protecting their mom.
Have you? Oh my gosh, you can hear it in there. Okay, I don't know about you. I can hear it in a guy's voice if he was
Yeah.
raised by a single mother and the way they talk. Like I had a show yesterday yesterday. I get all the days confused. But there was three guys on there. And I could tell you that two were raised by like in single family homes. Or the other issue too, and I think this is like more prevalent in like in white communities, to be honest, where it's like yeah, they're married, but the mom runs the whole show. Where like I think there's been like a whole generation like where it's like the mother is like running everything and
Mom's
like
the boss.
yeah, and where people
Yeah.
have just never seen a traditional relationship.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is because in the Go Girl 80s and 90s, like when I was growing up, and there's like She-Ra and Madonna and Shania Twain and Oprah, and like all these strong woman stuff starts coming out. What we saw in the sitcoms, because if you look at like sitcoms from the 50s, 60s, 70s, the dad is still the dad and he like runs things, and the mom is like more traditional mom. Once you get to the 80s and 90s, it starts being like The Simpsons or Everybody Loves Raymond or all these different sitcoms where the dad is a bumbling idiot who can't do anything. He's goofy, he's silly, he's always getting himself into trouble. And the mom is the one who's like organized and intelligent and thinking ahead and responsible. And she's always like, I don't know why I tolerate him. He'd
Mhm.
be so lost without me. And I am always jumping in to rescue my silly husband. And it's like, uh, they think that that's normal too. A lot of this comes down to this propaganda of everything being normalized, and you see this now with like the female rappers always talking about like sexually dominating men, right? What's the big trend with like
Oh my gosh, that goes back
rappers
to the
now?
goddess.
It does. It's like, in fact, Cardi B's Instagram is like a treasure trove for me because she has like pictures of herself dressed up in like a devil costume where it says, I do the controlling. Like that was her caption. I do the controlling. It's when she broke up with Offset for a while and then he like begged her to come back and she took him back.
Mm.
It's this idea of like, it's a matriarchy now. Like I'm the boss bitch in charge and I'm the one who says what's going to happen and I dominate you and you do what I let you do. And I mean, my own mother, that was her thing. The reason she wanted a younger guy, she picked somebody who was
You could
very like
control.
impressionable and naive and easy to control. And I remember asking her, like, when I got to my teen years, being like, okay, there was nothing wrong though. We had like a nice life and dad made good money and he was faithful and he didn't abuse you. Like, what the hell? What made you feel like it was fine to just like tear the family apart and then suddenly me and my sister are in daycare all day long and you're working and we don't see our dad ever? Like what made you think that that was like a good trade and worth it and that you just had the right to do that? And she got super angry and kind of like yelled at me and was like, because, and she's talking about her new husband, who I don't want to say his name, but she was like, because I tell him what we're eating for dinner. I tell him what we're spending the money on. He doesn't have his political opinions. I tell him what his political opinions are and who we're voting for. Right. Because my mother went to university and got very indoctrinated. She ended up like volunteering for Planned Parenthood in the 70s and was like, she still to this day considers herself like a far left Marxist feminist. And so
God,
if I gotta rip the family apart to smash the patriarchy, so be it. You know, they don't
I
care.
would pay to watch you debate her on live. Oh my gosh, that would be crazy. I know you can't. I know how that stuff
No,
goes. I know you can't do that,
no,
but
I can't do that.
but
And I wouldn't do that to her. Like I wouldn't, we don't talk. We haven't talked for years, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't like put her out there like that anyway. But the women I do debate might as well be her because it's the same ideology. This
I
doesn't come from them. It's an ideology that is fed to them that they then take
okay.
on.
This is what I've noticed. Like, so if you don't mind, how old are you?
I'm 42.
So I've noticed like yeah, your generation is like the divorce, like the first like generation that really got like everyone's divorced. The
Yes.
generation before that separated.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the first generation where like maybe they weren't divorced and like maybe on paper they were still married at death, but that's when like they started getting separated. But I've
Yeah.
just noticed that like in the generation before that it seems to be more based. I don't really know like that was a little bit more traditional, but it was like almost, and usually it's like like my generation's grandparents are the last ones that were in traditional relationships.
Yeah.
Where your generation, it's like even if they're together, it's not traditional because
Right.
it's still this 50-50. She kind of runs like the show, where it's like tough because our generation, like most of us have never seen a traditional relationship.
Right. I know. And that's the other reason that like when my husband and I got together, we had to like learn this and figure it out together because I never wanted to be divorced or have my kids grow up in a home without their dad, or that was never my choice. I was super against it. um I was like willing to do whatever it took. I would have stayed forever. It wouldn't have mattered, but the choice wasn't up to me at that point. So when I did get remarried, it was like, okay, I want a family. And when I say a family, I'm talking about generations into the future, the Wilson family, our
Right.
kids and their kids and those kids, because um for one thing, if you think about when they say you have to be successful, you have to have a career. uh I have 5 kids. I raised them at home. I homeschooled them. They all the ones that have grown up now are like, thank God. They're like very thankful for that. And they've said like, wow, we didn't even know like how good we had it until now we're adults and we're out in the real world and we see what other kids grew up with and what it did to them. Now my ones that are 20 and 22 are like, wow, like thank you. We didn't always get it when we were kids, but now we get it. They're going to grow up and get married and have kids with stable homes who are raised well, that they're probably going to be more stable, less mental illness, depression, substance abuse, all those things. And if I have, let's say I have 12 grandkids, and then those kids each have 3 kids, then I've got 36 great grandkids. So the ripple effect of my life and the choices I've made as a mom are going to go out into the future and
Right.
affect thousands of people throughout the next few centuries. Whereas if I just worked for a corporation, I would die and that would be it. They would just replace
Yeah.
me and that's it. So I'm going to have a whole legacy, a whole ripple effect that goes out into the future and affects the whole world just because I chose to just be a stay-at-home mom, right?
Well, and like I grew up, it's kind of a crazy story. My mom had 6 like biological kids I grew up with. I was the second out of 6. Oldest girl between 2 boys. So it's I'm telling you, tomboys, it's always next to a boy and daddy's girl. Now,
Yeah.
we had one kid my mom gave up for adoption because her and my dad got pregnant when she was like 17. Didn't meet
Oh,
him till I was 22, and then they adopted 3 teenagers like later. So it's interesting because when I was a kid, it's crazy. I spent so much time outside of the home, just like because I was in travel volleyball.
okay.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about travel volleyball, but it's very intense. Like I'm talking like you're gone every other weekend, like
Yeah.
out of state. And
Right.
so I grew up with like nannies a lot because my parents just couldn't keep up with like all of like I had like 5 hours of training after school. And it's weird because I'm in this weird like looking back, like you look back and you have hindsight, right? And I always think like, I loved volleyball. I was so passionate about it. But I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I really probably didn't spend as much time with my family as I think is good for a kid in hindsight, because I was always like the nanny was always driving me around because
Yeah.
my parents had what are they supposed to do? They had six kids. We all have to be in different places. But it's kind of interesting because before, like, sports maybe was something you did with your siblings or like the
Right.
neighborhood kids, and you
Yes.
would like it would bring you guys together. But now it's like it's gotten more competitive, and it's crazy because I trained so hard I could play. Like I'm probably in the top like 1 or 2% of talent or like of how far I've taken volleyball. But it's like, before you would do that and like bond as a family or like everyone,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, but it's like the corporation or like when they industrialize something, it's almost like it takes away from the family because, how am I supposed to spend a ton of time with my parents when they're telling me to go to, Vegas one weekend and Indianapolis another.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's another thing that affects birth rates and women's willingness to be mothers is like you were saying earlier, when my grandmother was having kids, her sisters were all, so she stayed home, her sisters stayed home, her mother was home, the neighbor ladies were all home, all the women were home. all the women were having babies. So they would help each other. Like if one lady in the neighborhood had a newborn, everybody would be coming to help and cooking meals, and your sister would come stay or your mother would come stay. You had all this support and you had all this help. And for me personally, trying to do this and be a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids, I had no help because my
Right.
mom didn't want anything to do with it. My sister's a career woman. My friends are all career women. Everyone around me is a career woman. I'm like one of the very few around who is at home with kids. So there was no one to help me. And I had no community. I had no camaraderie, no like bonding with other women because they were all off in cubicles doing career woman stuff,
Right.
right? So
Well,
I think that that makes it hard on women too. Whereas if we had that kind of support and community now, I think so many more women would do it.
yeah. Well, and I also realized that like because I just started looking, it's kind of weird once you start getting red pilled on the world. It's like I started looking at like the volleyball, like the volleyball industry, right? Because it
Mhm.
really is, it's crazy because you don't make money at it as a sport. So the women that do it really, really love it, right? And I was one of them. Like I still am. Like, you can hear it in my voice. It's so
Yeah.
fun. But what I realized is like the girls that like take it to the highest level, they're all by themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what I realized. All the girls coaching, like one of my coaches is like, she's a feminist and I really like her. Like she's genuinely like
Yeah.
such a nice girl or woman, right? But she's older. But I'm like, she's in her 40s and 50s and she's got no kids and no family. And she's a really successful coach. And then I realized I was like, oh shit, my coach in college was the same thing.
Yeah.
She was in her 40s and 50s, and I'm like, oh wow, so was her assistant coach. Oh wow, like everybody involved in this,
Right.
and like that takes it to the highest level is
Yeah.
by themselves. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that like a lot of these like industries that we're pushing women into, it's like one, and then I found out too, like with women's sports, it makes you more masculine
Yeah.
because it raises your testosterone. So I
Yeah.
felt like my whole life, I never fit in with like other women because I was just such a tom. Like nothing interested me. Like even me wearing like dresses now, my is so like I'm just not But I was like, wow. So like the reason I wasn't into all the girly stuff was literally probably I haven't gotten it tested because I just found this out like a week ago. But I was like, it's probably because I had high like testosterone.
That could be. I mean, I've been super into weightlifting for like 16 years. A lot of times, like people on the internet will be like, she's fat. And I'm like, no, I have big shoulders because I've been lifting weights for 15 years.
Well,
Um,
even lifting weights, it does that too. Isn't
Yeah,
that
it does. And
yeah.
I think, well, like I've always been a little bit more rational for a woman, like more rational, more practical, and more of a tomboy. And same thing as with you, where it's like the ladies around me would be like wanting to go window shopping. And I'm like, wait, we're going to
Oh my-
just go to the
I
mall and like,
hate shopping.
I hate
I
shopping
hate,
too. I'm
I
like, if I
hate
ever make millions, that'll be the first thing I outsource is have somebody go
Oh
do
my
the
gosh,
shopping for
that's
me.
that's exactly what I did when the YouTube every outfit I pick, I'm like, I just have my PA do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, because I hate shopping. I hate it.
Yeah. And like Tupperware parties or pampered chef parties, I was like, nope, I'm not doing those. Just like a lot of that stuff. I've had a little bit of trouble with that too. Although since I started writing and doing all this, I've met some really cool women and made really great friends. So it's cool to know there's other like based red pilled ladies out there who get it and who don't just think of everything from like, but what about me? But what about me? Like when you say you think in systems, the reason you're able to like take yourself out of it and look at stuff and look at what's going on and say, well, this doesn't make sense because you're not filtering everything first through this me filter of like, but what about me? Which is what I think most women, especially younger women today, do. It's all about me and how it affects me and what about me and what about what I want. It's like there's bigger things in life than just you and just what you want, for one, you know.
Well, and some stuff, I honestly I wasn't crazy triggered, but I was triggered by a little bit, like when men were like, there was no reason to get married today. I was like, what? But my parents are married. Like, I was like,
I
but
know.
what? But then it's
And
like,
I want to be married, you know?
yeah, yeah. But then you look at it from the men's point of view, and it's like, well, if that was my sister, I don't know if I would sign up. I'm just calling a spade, I think I want to hear what you think of this idea. I think men should get primary custody off the bat. Yeah, because I think that if women, because two reasons, right? I think it really helps everybody involved. Okay. I think that the parent that can afford the kids should keep the kids. They can afford the kids, right? Usually the man. Second of all, I think that if women leave, they don't get a reward.
Right.
They don't get the reward of like the chill. They always, and they act like it's a punishment. They're like, I have to have the kids. No, you, well, then sign them over to your baby
Right.
dad.
But they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that, especially because they won't get the child support and everything else, and they won't have the control. But you would see a hell of a lot less divorce. I tell you that. It would totally disincentivize divorce in the first place.
And in all honesty, I was thinking about this. I'm like, let's say like the worst happened. He leaves you for a younger woman. Okay, you're sad. He took the kid. I know it's horrible. But I was like, honestly, if he had the kids, to be honest, you probably have a better shot at getting remarried.
That's true.
You know, in all honesty, like, but I was like, in all honesty, I think the leaver should be punished. I think whoever's leaving, the other person should get the kids.
Well, that's basically what it was before. I think we should get, I absolutely always advocate for getting rid of no fault divorce. I think you should have to have some kind of just cause. Now, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and in our church, we do have some exceptions. We're not exactly like the Roman Catholics, who are like no divorce ever, no matter what, even if you're getting the crap beat out of you on the regular. But we're not like Protestants either, who tend to be much more liberal about divorce. We're like, okay, in cases of abuse, real abuse, not like he was mean to me or he won't let me spend $5,000 at Hobby Lobby every month. Real abuse, like in cases of abuse, abandonment, or like addiction that is so severe that it's endangering the rest of the family. Like say your husband's got like a crippling meth addiction and there's bikers coming to your house.
We can let you divorce your meth heads. Like we can.
So there are exceptions, but they are like, it has to be that you've done everything you can possibly do, working with your priest and with your family to try to rectify the situation first. And it has to be a serious thing in order for a divorce to be granted. And then even then, like remarriage has to be under certain circumstances. It's just not this flimsy thing where just women can, because right now, like I say, women can wake up and just be like, my husband doesn't make me feel sexy anymore, so I'm getting divorced. And it's like, that should never be a good enough reason to take a bulldozer to your children's lives.
Have you ever seen these sob stories? Okay, these like, I saw this one that was like, I was dancing on a bar and he told me to get down and he just didn't support me. It was my birthday. And I'm like, what the maybe you're acting like a hoe, Diane. Like, get off the bar table.
Exactly. Well, this is the thing that I always say too, is that now the way, because of the propaganda, women today think that a man having any kind of boundaries, any kind of self-respect, or just telling a woman no, that's abuse now. That's abuse. So you'll see these women that they're like in a marriage and they'll be like, but I want a new car every year and I want a vacation every year. Or I want to do this crazy thing that's probably really bad for the family. And just the man saying, listen, Diane, but no, Diane, that's not, that's abuse now. A man telling a woman no, having a boundary of any kind, or saying, no, you're being disrespectful to me and I'm not going to allow it. That is now considered abuse by most women. And that's where all this like men are abusive, men are abusive, men are abusive. It's because basically if you tell a woman no, you're an abuser now. And that's absurd. And that needs to end too. Because yeah, women feel fine punching the crap out of a guy. They think they're allowed to lay hands on men. They think they're allowed to, I see this all the time, women shaming their man in public. Like they'll be at dinner and like say something to the waitress, like mocking their husband or like, you know, putting him down or making fun of him or putting him down in front of family and friends. And women need love, but men really need respect. They need to feel respected and they need to feel needed. And so when you're constantly, this is like most women now love to just cut their man off at the knees constantly. And they think that's fine. They don't think there's anything wrong with it. They think it's cute. They think it's funny.
No, I've definitely, because in where I grew up, my siblings and I just roast each other. Like literally,
Yeah.
we just like it's like yeah, it's just like how I grew up. And when I was in a relationship, that's what I realized that I would do because I was so used to it.
Yeah.
And
Me too. I did
yeah,
that too.
and it was something I had to like train myself out of because I was like, oh no, you can't. Like men don't see it like that. Like they see
No,
it
they
as like
don't.
really disrespect. Like it's one thing when it's you know your sister or whatever. Like that's yeah, and
It's
that's what
different.
yeah, I
Right.
was like, that's what I realized that men like see respect as love. And it's funny, it actually helped me with one of my brothers. Like, he's just a really like dominant personality. And when we were younger, like, me and him just butt heads all the time. You know, he's my little brother. I
Yeah.
don't listen to him. Like, but what I realized is like the second I started, like, because one day I just woke up and I was like, Adam is actually a really hard worker. He's actually really smart. And I was like, you know what? If I had to bet on one of my siblings being like a really rich, like super successful, I'm like, I would probably bet on Adam. And I was like, maybe I should like take his advice. And all of my other sisters did not get along with Adam because again, he's the one bossing everyone around, telling
Right.
everyone what to do. Everyone's annoyed. And then one day I just started saying, you know what, Adam, like, what do you know, and like actually like listening to him. And it was crazy. I went from fighting with him all the time to like I'm probably closer with him than any of my other siblings now. And
Yeah.
that's what I realized, like when you respect a guy's opinion, it's like that's like the ultimate form of love to them.
Yeah, and that's really all they want. Like I saw you had what's the fellow you just had on? It was on last night. It was like Waller. Is that his
Yeah.
name?
Justin Waller,
He,
yeah.
yeah, he was talking about that. How like if you are a hardworking guy and you're really successful and you're doing all this for your wife or your girlfriend and you take her on a vacation or do something special with her, really all the men want to hear is like, wow, I really appreciate that. I see that you put in all this effort and did all of this, and I really appreciate it. And thank you. And I respect you. Like, if you just do that, like 99% of men are going to treat you like gold. They're going to stick around forever. They're going to be great dads. Men don't need that much. If we are just kind and respectful to them and not constantly cutting them off at the knees, they're great. Like my husband, same thing. When we first got together, I had bad habits like that too. And we still roast each other like in private for fun because
Mhm.
we're both like that a little bit, but I never do it in public because when we first got together, I would kind of do that. Not same thing. I wasn't trying to be awful to him or anything, but I
Yeah.
just didn't realize the impact it had. And early on in our dating, he told me that. He was like, look, if this is how you behave, like, I don't want to date you. And at first, I was really mad. At first, I was like, ah. And then it took me about 2 minutes to be like, wait, do I want to be that person? Do I want to be the girl who like throws stuff at him and has a snotty, sarcastic comment for
Mhm.
everything he says? Like, no. And then I realized like I had picked that up from, my mom and from other people I was around and got that under control. And it's like, did wonders for the relationship. And still to this day, if I just am like decent to him and respectful, he's the best husband and dad that I could ever want. So it's
Mhm.
not that hard, but we make it super hard. And I think it's because everything caters to women and women's feelings. And it's like, it must be that the problem's with the man. And the man has to understand the woman and he has to think about her and how it impacts her. And a lot of men will try to talk about something that bothers them or a problem they have, and their wife will take it and make it about her. My husband says that too, that like he feels like he sees that a lot with his friends. Like his friend will say, oh, I'm having a really hard time and struggling at work, and the wife will immediately make it about like, well, now I'm worried, what if you lose your job and what if we can't afford things, and now I'm worried and it's my problem. and
Do
and then
you
he ends up having to comfort her.
do you ever have this problem where girls will tell you their relationship problems and you don't agree with them? And
Yes.
it's just like I have this one friend. She's dating like a YouTuber, right? And she's always like whining to me about the stuff he has to do for work, and I'm just like, you knew that when you started dating him.
Right.
I got
Yeah.
no sympathy. Like, I told you. We both
Yeah.
know.
That's another thing women do all the time. They all think they want the alpha, right? They think they want the really successful guy that makes six figures and is 6 feet tall and has six pack abs. But what they don't realize, most women don't actually want that because those kind of men, they don't have a lot of time to give you attention.
It's not going to be about you. You're not going to get a ton of his time. You're not going to have a date night every single week. He's not going to be constantly telling you you're pretty. He's going to be busy. He's going to be focused. He's going to have a ton of demands on his time and attention. And you're going to have to be like, my husband's this way. He's a very successful, very busy guy. And if I wasn't a person who's pretty like self-sufficient, happy to be at home doing my own thing, and like I understand he's busy. I respect that he's busy. And for years, he had to work like 70-hour weeks so I could stay home. Right. And so, what am I going to do? Complain that I don't get enough attention or complain that he's not home enough? That's not going to work. So, if you are a girl who that's your priority, you want lots of attention from a man and you want him to focus on you, you'd be better off with the type of guy who maybe just works a 40-hour week somewhere and makes an okay living, and you're never going to have a ton of money, but he'll like build you a deck on the back of the house because he knows you like it, or he'll, make you stuff and build you things and dote on you a little more. But don't be going for like ultra successful alpha types if you need attention and time, because you're not going to get it from them.
Yeah, and like a lot of times, like, when I look at my parents, I'm like, my dad was gone a lot growing up. So I'm just like, I don't think you women nowadays could be faithful. Like my mom wasn't like that. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I'm like, and that's, oh my gosh, I have this controversial opinion. Everyone was hating on me on Twitter. I don't think I'm like, okay, cheating is not okay. I don't advocate for cheating, but why do we act like it's something you can't work through? And I mean this mostly women, okay? Because let's just be honest. Cheating for men and women is different.
Yeah.
Men detach a lot more. And we don't really talk about the men's side. Why did he cheat? Well, you've been nagging on him every day. You don't appreciate him. You don't sleep with him ever.
Yeah, that's
and
a big
he
one.
Cheats. And you're crying and whining and, oh, it's the worst thing. Like it's not something you can ever work through. And I just don't believe that, because at the end of the day, it's not about you anymore. You got kids. And I really think that if you can, you should, and I even say that even to the men, honestly. And I know the men don't like it when I say this, but it's like, if you can for your kids, I think the kids are first. Like, what did the 5-year-old do?
Right, exactly.
In this. So it's like, you can put your feelings aside, if you got to cheat back. Sorry, that's not the right word. But like, if they're a serial cheater, but like, keep the kids out of it, keep like, why do the kids have to be, and and the other thing is like, sticking it out for the kids is not a bad thing.
No, I don't think it is either.
But arguing in front of your kids and making them a part of your problem is. So if you can't learn to get along, maybe it would be better if you could just learn to get along.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like, so when I told a couple people I was going to be doing this show with you, that was the number one thing everybody said. They're like, are you going to give her pushback about her cheating opinions? And honestly, I hadn't heard, like, I was like, because they would send me like the tiniest soundbite of you saying something. And I'm like, yeah, but I need more context.
No,
I'm guessing there's more context.
Someone asked me on a show if I would accept cheating. I don't wish to be cheated on, but I said for the right guy, I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. If you're with a guy that you don't think is replaceable and you have children with him, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm in it. Like, I'd figure it out. I like to think. I mean, you don't know till you're in it, right? But it's like, for the kids, the children, let's just,
Well, that's something that's going to get me in trouble. And don't feel bad, because everyone's always mad at me too. And I'm always in trouble as well. And I would agree that if there's kids involved, yes, you should make every single effort to work through it. And this is, again, where if we had community and people were in church and things like that, men didn't just like, maybe the top percent, maybe those really tippy top elite guys could get away with that. But for most men, it was like, you would get ostracized from work, from community, from your friend group. If you were known to be like a serial cheater, like companies wouldn't want to hire you because it brings a lot of drama and you're not reliable and you're not trustworthy. It used to be more stigmatized by the community. And that gave a lot of people a way to work through. Like, if there was an affair, you could work through it, because it was like, oh, if this gets out, it's not going to be good for you. So if we still had community, there would be less cheating. And if it did happen, it would be something people had to work through. Maybe your priest would be helping or your family would be helping to sort out what went on. But I do think what you said about men and women cheating is, it is different. They do it for different reasons. Women, it's usually like emotional and like, I want to be paid attention to. And guys who want to get married women in the sack, they blow a lot of smoke up their ass and tell them all the things they want to hear. They give them all the attention and glorify and worship them and all that stuff. And so I think women do it for that reason. And men, the number one thing I hear from men, if they do have affairs, they're like, look, I didn't want to, but she hasn't slept with me in like 8 years. Like after
Yeah.
our second kid, she just wouldn't anymore. And I haven't, I can't just go the rest of my life never having sex. Like I didn't get married for that. And that's a really common thing I hear. And I've gotten in trouble for saying, I think if you're married, I don't really believe in marital, because I think that you should be being generous and that you belong to your husband. He belongs to you too, but you certainly belong to him. And you can't tell a man, okay, I want you to sleep with no one but me for the rest of your life, but then I'm not going to put out. You can't do that. To me, that's abuse. I think that's abusive. And if a man is having an affair for that reason, it's been like a year and you haven't slept with him, that's your fault. And I know everyone's going to hear me say that and I'm going to get a whole bunch of nasty DMs, but I think that that's true.
And the other thing, here's the other thing that irritates me. When girls, all right, you go after a guy you know is a cheater. Now, how do you know he's a cheater? Let's just, oh, come on. He's the top 10% of looks. Top 10%, like, come on.
And he had a girlfriend when you got with him. How often do you see that? He had a girlfriend when you got with him, but now that he's with you, you're expecting he won't cheat. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and so I just don't like they get mad because I'm like, look at the top 15, like most of societies have been monogamous. They have but the top 15% of men have not.
Yeah.
So we still have monogamous roots. So it's like, I'm not saying that doesn't happen because my dad didn't cheat, but my dad didn't grow up in a world where were throwing themselves at him. Like they're, the athletes nowadays, like Jason Derulo, that got so much trouble for Jason Derulo's baby mama or whatever was trying to expose him for cheating. And and the thing is, you have to understand, men at that level, the women are trying to figure out how to get them to cheat on their wives. Like there are women that go to basketball games, football games, figure out where the players are, chase them to there's a woman who literally would try, like her goal was to get the married men to cheat. And to say that a good man couldn't fall, and that's what they say, oh, they just falled into some, well, come on, he's got a 21-year-old that's in the top 10% of beauty, even a good guy.
Yeah,
it's gonna that's true. Time. And
that's true.
That's the realization I had with my dad, where I'm like, you know what? My dad isn't really in those circles, whatever. But if he was in, even the best men I know, if they were in a job like that, they're human.
Yeah. Well, so my husband, when he was working full time as an engineer in this big factory, there were all these women assembly line workers that would try to they would come up to him seeing him eat his lunch and be like, oh, I forgot my lunch money today. Could you buy me lunch just this one time and I'll pay you back? Trying to talk to him, trying to sit with him. And he would be like, no offense, I have a policy that I don't talk to women at work. I don't eat lunch with them. I'm not gonna buy you. I'm sorry you don't have lunch, but no. And they would get mad and offended, but he's like, I can see what they do. They don't want to date the other assembly line worker guys because they don't make much, but they know that all of us guys in engineering make good money, and a lot of them are single moms, and that's why they're working in a factory. So they're going to try to weasel their way in. Even if they know you're married, they're going to try to wiggle in there and try to compromise you or something like that. And the other thing they can do is, even if he's just seen talking to them or going to get a lunch with them or anything like that, they can then accuse him of something, and it becomes her word against theirs, and his job is in jeopardy, his marriage is in jeopardy, his reputation's in jeopardy. He can accuse her, or she can accuse him of assault. So he basically does the Mike Pence rule. He's like, I don't answer DMs from women. I don't have meetings with women. I don't do lunch with women unless my wife is there or it's a full-on group setting.
I don't do it. It's too risky. I'm not going to put myself at risk like that. And now that he's got a successful YouTube show, I mean, there's been people who don't like him, who want his channel canceled. They will send thoughts to try to get in his DMs and see if he'll reply so that they can then expose him or tell me or something. So it's like, yeah, men do, especially the more successful they are, they have like armies of hoes coming for them all the time.
And my whole point was just like, I didn't say do it. Like, I think that's
Right.
great
No.
that he does it, but I'm saying like, can't we have some grace? Like,
Right.
can we have some grace and understanding for the opposite gender where it's like a lot of the women have, okay, like if you agree that, you know, attention is to women as sex is to men, which I
Right.
think is
I do,
true.
yeah.
Okay, well, what about your open Instagram? It's funny because when you get into a relationship, men are expected to stop having sex, but women aren't expected to close all their social media, take the
Right.
butt pictures off of Instagram.
Right.
So it's just like we can't have a little bit of understanding.
Yeah.
No, he's the
Oh
devil.
yeah, it's like
It
if
can't be worked through. And I have an example of someone I know who their dad was a serial cheater. He cheated all the time. But one day, you know, and she stayed with him through it, and everyone called her crazy. And one day, I mean, maybe he didn't stop and he just got better at it. I don't know. But when she passed away, she was still married and she died with her husband, and they in the last 10-15 years of her life she had a great marriage. So
yeah.
was it better for her to die alone? Was that the better option for her?
Yeah, and break up the whole family, and
Yeah, she
kids'
died with
lives are wrecked, and
she
yeah.
died with her 3 kids and her husband. Like, is
Yeah, but women, we train women that life should be like they should get everything they want and that they can have it all, and that they should never settle, girl, never settle, right? So we give them this idea that if the minute anything is wrong, the minute a man doesn't live up to his vows or his expectations, like just get rid of him and go to the next one. There's always going to be
right.
another one to swipe to. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's a bad idea. But you're right. We have a totally different standard for men than for women. And like when you were saying, these girls get married and they're not taking their booty pics off of Instagram. They don't. And then if their husband said, look, we're married now, you can't put up pictures unless you are covered, that's considered abuse. He's oppressing her, he's abusing her, he's controlling, right? You how
And she
many
can go to family court and they'll log it as abuse.
they
That's
will
crazy.
how many videos have you seen where some girl, she's doing her breakup video and she's talking about her ex, and it's like, he wouldn't even let me go to the beach in a thong. So obviously I should have seen that he was an oppressive narcissistic abuser because he didn't want me going to the beach in a thong. And they will literally think that that is a sign of narcissism and abuse. And it's like, why do you want to get married and be in a relationship if you want other men to see your ass? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But it's like what we have normalized, and it's the expectation we've trained women to have now. So
It's like, you can have everything. Is there anything, okay, a bargain? What's the bargain?
okay, so I think feminism was a Faustian bargain. I think it was basically a deal with the devil where it's like you're offered this, feminism sells this lie to women that they're going to be empowered, they're going to be sexually liberated, they can have it all. You can have a family and a career and a husband, and you can have a high body count, and you can have everything, you can have all these things. And it doesn't ever work out in real life. And like I said, for the vast majority of women, they don't get that high powered career, they're working a crap job that they don't love, because they have to pay their bills, or maybe they like their job, but it's not like everyone thinks they're going to be a fashion designer or a CEO or a boss, and that's not the reality for most women. And even for men, a lot of men who supported feminism thought they were getting free sex out of the deal, no strings attached, and it turns out then
Most of
they end
them
up
are
in
not.
family court, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
so we
Or,
all got sold this
yeah.
dream of gender equality and feminism and liberation, and it's destroyed life for everyone. And the reason I do this, the reason I'm out here writing these books, talking to you, is because I care above and beyond anything else about kids and the lives of children and how children are raised and what their life is like growing up. And those children become the dysfunctional adults that we're dealing with now. So I feel like society has a vested interest in fixing these problems, but yeah, we've ended up destroying ourselves with feminism. Feminism has destroyed society, and therefore it affects men, it affects women, it affects children, it affects the fabric of reality, because now we're dealing with erasure of women because of the movement stuff. So it's like it was a very Faustian deal. Women thought they were getting this great deal out of feminism, and it turned out to be a trap, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially they're like, yeah, we all get sex. They're like, nah, like 15% of you do. The rest of you get a born again virgin, let me tell you.
Right.
Yeah, like it's like 20, maybe 25. Let's be generous. 25%,
Yeah.
the rest.
Yeah,
No.
maybe it was more appealing in 1960 when the BMI was a lot lower. Have you ever seen pictures of women at the beach in the 60s and there's like
No.
no fat ladies? And now, like, what do men get now? Now you get a blue-haired feminist with a liberal arts degree, a ton of debt, and a sky-high body count. Yay!
Okay.
Here you go.
What? Okay. What? Do you see any solutions going forward? Like, because
Yes.
to me, I'll tell you my thoughts, and I want to hear
Okay,
yours
yes.
because you know more than I do. Like, I don't meet many people that know more than I do about feminism, to be honest.
Well, thank
'Cause
you.
most people think there's three waves still, and I know that. But you, I'm gonna say you're more of a feminism expert. So my thought is I think that we should ban all the child support shit. I think I want to just banish it. I don't care. Yeah, you made your bed, lie in it. That's my thought. Most of you aren't stay-at-home wives, so this doesn't really make sense anymore. Get rid of the child support, get rid of the alimony. May who have the lever, get rid of no fault divorce. Give the lever, the if anyone leaves, well, if no fault divorce, you're stuck. You can't do anything anyway. Haha. And
Yep.
and maybe I kind of want to ban birth and take away women. I know that's crazy, but
In a
that's my
perfect
solution.
world.
Now, I don't see this as practical or probable. I don't think this will ever happen. So I'm curious, what would your ideal solution be? And what would your practical, right?
Right. I do have both of those things. So, yeah, I agree with you. It's, you can't put the shit back in the horse. So, the likelihood of overturning the amendment or control, or, I mean, we did make a little progress with overturning Roe v. Wade, but even that it hasn't done what people, I think, hoped it would do. So, I don't think it's likely that you're just going to outlaw stuff and fix things that way. If I had a magic wand, that's what I would do. I would get rid of, well, I'd get rid of universal in general, but certainly this country, America wasn't even,
Wait, what's
universal suffrage is one person, one vote. Everybody over 21 can vote.
Oh yeah, let's get rid of it.
And there's lots of different ways. Yeah, because it's like, look around at all the people.
crackhead
Go
get
to
the
Walmart. Go to
same
Walmart and ask yourself if you want all of those people deciding your future.
Yeah.
But it wasn't founded like that. American democracy, even the republic, wasn't founded that way. There were stipulations, and there's many ways you could go about it. You could say only male heads of household can vote. You could say only male property owners or something like that. There's a bunch of ways you could do it that would be better than just everyone gets a vote. But certainly women voting threw everything completely out of whack. So I would, if I could wave my magic wand, do that. And women scream and yell and they're like, you're taking away our rights. It's like, first of all, I'm not doing anything. I'm just talking about a purely hypothetical if I could, which I can't. But yes, I would take that away. I would get rid of no fault divorce. I would get rid of, I probably would have something where if you got divorced because there was an extreme extenuating circumstance, that yeah, probably the man would be better in a lot of ways to have the custody. Me and my sister ended up going to our dad because our mom was so unstable and off the wall and things like that. And it was a huge relief for us because even though my dad wasn't perfect, it was just more stable. Life was more stable. So I would think something like that would be better. But I think the real solution of what we could do, I always say the bad news is that women are easy to propagandize, but the good news is that women are easy to propagandize.
Okay.
So, people like you, I think you're super important because you're reaching a younger demographic than I ever would with my books and things like that, which is why I really appreciate you having me on to have a conversation. Um, but younger women like you who are kind of looking at the situation like I did at your age and going, wait a minute, this seems really messed up. This seems really jacked. Like, what's going on here? Um, I think most women, if they could, if they really thought it was realistic to have a stable marriage, have kids, and stay home, they would. And the reason I think that, I end the book with this. Simone de Beauvoir was a existential philosopher from France who was a feminist philosopher in the 20th century. And she said in a famous interview in the 70s with Betty Friedan, we cannot allow women to have the choice of staying home and raising children, because if they do, too many of them will choose it. Most will choose that. So we have to force feminism on them because they're not going to go for it themselves. And I think the reason I write the book, you doing your shows, some of us who are breaking through this feminist matrix are showing women like, hey, you got tricked into this. You're propagandized into it. It's not doing for you what you thought it was. It's all a big lie. If most women could stay home and have kids and have a community life with their family, that's what most women actually would prefer. Like
Yeah.
my oldest daughter's 22 and she does have a job right now because she's not married. And she called me one day and she goes, Mom, I get it now. We go to work all day and we pretend it's awesome and it sucks. She's like, working sucks. We're all just sitting around pretending it's awesome when really having to get up and just work all day. And she's like, I pay rent, which is a waste of money. I live with roommates. She's like, I would far rather be married and putting, all my effort and everything I'm doing every day into my own future with my family. Like, why would I not want to build a life with my spouse? Why do I want to build a life with roommates or at the place that I work right now? Like, she's kind of seeing that, yeah, this does kind of suck. And we've been sold a bunch of lies. So I think we can propagandize women the other direction and say, this is what I say all the time. Don't say I'm just a stay-at-home mom. It's awesome that you're a stay-at-home mom. You are making a huge impact on the next generation by choosing to raise your children yourself and not outsource that job to a minimum wage immigrant who doesn't care about your kids, right? By choosing to stay married and keep your kids' dad in the home and in their life, you are affecting future generations. Like, if you want power, if you want influence, if you want meaning in your life and you want your life to matter, choose motherhood, choose being a good wife, choose to contribute in all of these ways to your family, to the community around you. We could have a society again that is built on families and long-term thinking about the future rather than just this consumerist, like, use it all up before it's gone, get your booty pics out there, get the likes and the clicks and the money, and then I'll worry about getting old when I'm old, and and not thinking about the second half of our lives. So I think women are not very happy. I think they're looking for solutions. And if they hear people like you and people like me explain what has happened and how we got here and how we can unscrew the situation, I think many of them will. I think most of them would if they actually had the choice presented to them that way. And if they didn't feel this intense pressure that they have to be a career woman or they're going to be considered a loser.
Do you know any women by chance? I want to do a finance episode where we go through like what the guy has to make in order to have like X amount of kids cost this much. Because I think that I've heard that it doesn't cost as much to raise kids as they propagate. And I
Yes.
really wanted to go through like, okay, so women say I have to date a guy that makes this much, right?
Right.
So, but it's like, I like I've heard that you can actually live okay off of 40,000 a year on one income.
Yep.
You just like move out of the city and you don't take vacation. Like, yeah. And so that's what I've been, that's like an episode I want to do soon. If you know anyone or if you want to do it.
I would love to do it. And I have a whole like folder of stats
Really?
on that. Yes, because those statistics I looked up, some of it comes from like the CDC or the Department of Labor, but a lot of it comes from think tanks where they are trying to convince people that it's unrealistic to have kids, certainly to have more than one or two, and that both people should be working and must be working and things like that. So it's very biased. And if you actually take into account, I have all these numbers in my little folder. If you take into the account the cost of mothers working, you actually aren't making anything. So like say you have to make more than 50,000 a year to really be making minimum wage as a woman, as a mother, when you consider the cost of a second vehicle, insuring that second vehicle, gasoline, commuting back and forth to work, your work wardrobe, your lunches that you buy, the cost of daycare, the cost of having to miss work because of your kids, and then your job suffers or you have to take time off for maternity, all these different things. When we tell, now I don't care if you don't ever want to get married, you don't ever want to have kids, you can have a career and be a career woman. That's fine with me. I'm mainly concerned with women and families and mothers being told they have to work. Like even the Trump administration was constantly, we're coming up with programs to get mothers back to work. And I was like, why? Why are you doing that?
No,
That's a terrible idea.
yeah.
So
Because I
there's a
really just
whole,
like to, I'd
yeah,
like
there's
to,
a lot of economic arguments to be made against mothers working, and that it will raise wages. If we have less labor participation by mothers, it will raise wages for men and things like that. So,
well,
yeah, I've
because
got a
I
bunch on
guess,
that.
yeah, I want to do like, because imagine, because me, it's crazy. I grew up rich, but I have the cheapest lifestyle. Like, I don't even know, dude. Like, it's funny because I like, I'm just not like my dad. It's funny. He does finance stuff with me, and he's like, "You make this money, but you don't spend it." He's like, "You spend." Last year, my personal expenses was 150 pounds.
Really?
Yeah, outside of like food, you know what I mean? Like,
Like
just
nothing.
yeah, I know, girl. I don't. Yeah, yeah. This month it'll be higher. I bought a dress. I was like,
Well,
yeah,
there you go.
yeah. But so I was thinking like, so if a girl says she's 20, right, and she says I want 4 kids, where like I want to break through like one, where are husbands? Like, where should she look for a husband, right? Because half of the kids out there nowadays didn't grow up with functional families, so they don't even know how to.
Right.
We don't know how to pick, right?
I know.
Then number two, where are they? Who are they? What do they want? And how much do they need to make, right? Because we do have to go down to numbers. You can't just like date a guy that's a
Right.
broke, like let's, you know,
Yeah,
like a lot of the guys will say, oh, they're gold diggers. I'm like, well, they should gold dig a little bit. Like I'm
they
not
should. If you want to have a bunch of kids, you got to have a way to feed them, and you don't want it to be like miserable and you're raising your kids in poverty and depending on the government. So no.
Yeah, so I want to do so like if a girl wants 5 kids like you, and her husband has to live in a major like well, one, does her husband have to live in a major city? Can she live outside of the city and he just commutes? Like how
Right.
what are the options? So that's not today because
Right. No, but I could give you a
I would
ton of
love to do that.
yeah,
Yeah, I would love to do that show if you want to do it like, next
absolutely.
week or the week after.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun. And that's something people ask me all the time. So I'd love to do a show about that and get that information out there. And as somebody who has done it myself, like we had to figure that out because we started when we were young together with no money. And I already had a couple kids and we knew we wanted more. It was tough to figure out. We did figure it out though. And I've thought a lot about it since because people are always asking me that question. So,
Yeah.
and I've
Yeah,
got some good stats and figures on it. So we could do that. That would be fun.
I'm really bad with numbers, so I was like, I am not the person.
You
My dad.
don't seem like it. You don't seem
Okay.
like you would be.
No, I'm good with like stats, but when it comes to like budgeting, accounting, it just does my brain. My dad helps me. I can't do it. But okay, thank you so much. This is probably my favorite interview I've done. This has been so fun.
Wow.
You
That's so
red
nice.
pilled me even further today, which I thought I was red pill, but every day I get more red pill.
Well, that's what I'm here to stuff horse-sized red pills down everyone's throat.
I know you said it at the beginning, but remind them, where can they buy your book, website?
Yes, you can find my book on Amazon. It's Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. I have a YouTube channel. It's just Rachel Wilson. The tag for it is like at Rachel.Wilson on YouTube. And I'm on Twitter at Rach4Patriarchy. So that's Rach, the number 4, patriarchy. And then Substack, Rachel Wilson or rwilson.substack.com.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. You are so
Absolutely.
talented.
Thanks for having me on.
I would love to see you on like a Joe Rogan or a Tim Cat. Like you would do so well on one of those.
That would be really fun. Lord willing. We'll see what happens.
Okay, guys, make sure you like the video on your way out, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, who should I bring on next? You know, let a girl know. Like the video on your way out, subscribe, go buy your book, and I'll talk to you guys next time.